Kacha. With a slight force from Ross's fingers, the long sword twisted and broke. At the same time, a twisting force was transmitted along the long blade and bombarded the captain's body, letting blood gush out of his mouth as he flew backward. Then he stepped on his feet and the entire ship again showed strange ripples that spread in all directions. Eventually, countless boards overturned and the entire ship folded violently in the middle and broke apart. After destroying 2 battleships in succession, Ross stood on the broken battleship and gasped for a moment. After adjusting slightly, he jumped up and landed on the sea. Destroying battleship takes less stamina than Ross though. Despite the enormous burden placed on his physical body by the power of distortion, it took only about 20% of his actual physical strength to destroy 2 battleships in such a short period of time. This consumption is completely affordable, whiz. Ross continues to charge towards the next battleship. His body is actually running on the surface of the sea. In the case of Geppo, moonwalk, the air can become a pedal to step upon, so it is naturally much easier to use seawater as a pedal. With the power of his current distortion fruit, the phantom formed by refracting light can be as far as 20 or 30 meters away from his original body, enough to make the gunfire on the battleship unable to find his true location. Crash bang. After an ineffective cannonball fire, Ross stepped up and out of the sea. He jumped up and landed over on the next battleship. He is here. Damn. What should we do? Seeing Ross once again ignoring the cannonball fire and jumping up from the sea and onto the battleship, numerous Marines on the battleship showed some horror on their faces. However, almost immediately after Ross jumped on the battleship and landed, a single powerful sword energy strike came from the west direction intending to cut his head. Faced with the sudden attack, Ross did not panic. He hugged his hands from both sides and clamped the sword energy between his palms, and then he rotated in the air, throwing the sword energy towards the sea. Sneer. The sword energy fell into the sea and cut a fissure of more than 10 meters in the sea. Looking at the aftermath of the attack on the sea, Ross's eyes slightly fluctuated. He had guessed who wielded the sword that attacked him. There was no doubt that the only one who could display this level of sword arts was the Rear Admiral Onigumo from the Marine headquarters. Ross also had a little impression of Onigumo. He vaguely remembered that during the War of the Best in the original story, Onigumo cooperated with Admiral Kizaru and captured Captain Marco of the 1st Division of the Whitebeard Pirates by clasping seastone cuffs on his wrist. Ross turned his head and looked in the direction from where the sword energy came. There. A figure is wearing a Marine Justice coat with a brown-purple hair and a Marine Justice plaque embroidered with a military officer's badge and standing on the top of the cabin. It is the Marine headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo. He held a sword in his hands and was coldly staring at Ross. Yes, it's Rear Admiral Onigumo. Oh, we are saved. Many Marines on battleship did not see when Onigumo arrived on their battleship, but they were relieved seeing the power displayed by Onigumo's sword. Ross's strength is too terrible for them to resist, and the only person that can take him down is the Rear Admiral Onigumo, an elite Marine sent by the Marine headquarters on Grand Line. As a Rear Admiral of the Marine headquarters, Onigumo has a prestigious reputation on the Grand Line, and he had also defeated pirates with bounties of over 100 million berries, so it is natural that he will not have any problems dealing with Ross. With him on the battleship, it was like eating a reassurance pill for many Marines present. Their panic and fear faded away and a calm feeling replaced them. Ghost Hand Ross, you bastard. Onigumo looked at Ross on the deck with cold eyes and said, do you know how much responsibility I have to take for losing 2 battleships? At the same time as his last sentence fell, he suddenly turned into a shadow, rushing towards Ross, with his sword wrapped in a powerful sword energy force descending at Ross. Whiz. Ross's footsteps turn as he also shows Soru of Marines Rokushiki. After avoiding the sword, his body turned as he attacks Onigumo with his one leg. Onigumo snorted as he blocked the attack with his sword. Buzz. Ross kicked Onigumo's legs on the side of the blade and the power of distortion jumped up, causing Onigumo's arms to slightly shake with the blade. There is a huge power gap between the branch Rear Admiral and headquarters Rear Admiral. One is responsible for the defense of their respective sea area, whether it is the East, North, South, or West Blue, while headquarters Rear Admiral is responsible to guard a section of the Grand Line. As the Marine headquarters Rear Admiral, Onigumo is not only proficient in Marines Rokushiki, but he can also use 2 different types of hockey. After the standoff, the 2 men retreated a few steps. If losing 2 battleships make you this angry, then I am sorry, because this is just the beginning. Ross looked at Onigumo and said calmly,
I said this when I was forced to become a pirate. I hope you don't regret the orders that were issued at that time. Onigumo was silent when he heard Ross's words. Regret? A little bit. But what he regretted was not that Ross was classified as a pirate, but that Lieutenant Colonel Laika, a waste of Marines who couldn't even deal with Ross in the very beginning. At this point, there is no possibility of any reversal. Marines can never give up their prestige for a single individual. Only by putting Ross down to the bottom of the sea can the majesty of Marine be demonstrated, and the pirates on the sea can be deterred. From your refusal to join Marines, I can see that there is no justice in your heart. Even if we didn't do anything, you will surely be on the road that is opposed to justice, so whatever you say does not have any significance. Onigumos coldly said, and he stepped forward, his left hand holding a sword sweep and his right hand holding another sword chops at the same time, creating a cross-shaped sword energy to cut Ross. A good excuse. Ross's face flashed with a trace of sarcasm. He punched out, hitting the center of the cross-shaped sword energy. The power of distortion suddenly broke out and the cross-shaped sword energy was twisted and crushed, creating a deep crack on the surrounding shipboard. After smashing Onigumo's sword energy, Ross suddenly stepped forward with a strong power of distortion wrapped around his fist and punched towards Onigumo's chest. He was too lazy to start an argument with a Marine. There is no room for reconciliation between him and the Marines. By killing Marine captains and Rear Admiral, he can get talent proficiency points. In his eyes, Marines are just his prey. Buzz. Onigumo crossed his two swords and resisted Ross's attack, then he violently swung his swords at Ross's direction. At the same time, he jumped up and swept his legs. Rankyaku, Tempest Kick. The two sword energies with strong horizontal foot power are interwoven with each other, forming a network of sword energies, which cuts towards Ross. Ross's eyes were indifferent, his hands were separated up and down, and he tore the web of sword energy by pulling it up and down, and then he stepped right through the middle. Distorted Tempest. As he stepped out, his whole body suddenly shook and it was divided directly into three figures, which surrounded Onigumo from three different directions. The original power of distortion fruit. In terms of light distortion, he could only refract light to this extent. Ross has been able to use the distortion of light to create two phantom doppelgangers that are identical to himself. Such phantom doppelgangers have a certain impact, even for people who can use observation hockey, because when they see a fist coming, even if they know it is a phantom, most people will still make instinctive evasion or take defensive actions. Such insignificant skill. Looking at the three identical Ross, surrounding and besieging him, Onigumo snorted and expanded his observation hockey. He swept the two phantom doppelgangers with his two swords and at the same time attacked Ross with his sword energy. Although creating phantom doppelganger consumes stamina and takes up part of the power of distortion, Onigumo is more affected and it is more difficult for him to attack Ross with all his strength. ZZ. Ross's hands were empty as he grabbed Onigumo's sword energy attacks, twisted them into a ball and threw the sword energy ball back towards Onigumo.
Onigumo used Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, and kicked towards the incoming attack, but at this time, Ross followed up and punched out with his fist wrapped in the power of distortion.
At the same time, the other two phantom doppelgangers also punched towards Onigumo, one from left and one from the right. Although he knew that the left and right are the phantom doppelgangers, Onigumo still instinctively reacted to avoid Ross's attacks. Bang! The fists and swords intersected and the swords coated in armament hockey in Onigumo's hands showed sign of instability. The two swords also tremored violently, giving a buzz. It seems that you can't cope with this insignificant skill. Ross sneered. He stepped on his feet and used Soru. His entire figure moved sideways as he surrounded Onigumo with his two phantom doppelgangers, constantly switching his position with them. Onigumo hummed gloomily and suddenly closed his eyes. Instead of watching Ross's attacks, he only used Kami-e, paper drawing, of the Marines' Rokushikis and observation hockey to capture Ross's position, while holding his swords in both of his hands with armament hockey coating them completely. Armed. Around the two swords, the armament hockey's colors shook violently. Suddenly, they gathered together. The colors changed from surrounding the swords and became attached to them, turning the two swords into pitch black colors. The strength of armament hockey is high and low, and at the high level, armament hockey can be used to achieve the hardening effect. Even at just the basic hardening, it has already surpassed the basic level of armament hockey and entered the high level. Armament hockey hardened. Ross stared slightly but did not show any fear. He thought intently before putting away the phantom doppelgangers and roused up the power of distortion fruit. Distortion fist. Two-blade stream, caress cut. Onigumo combines two swords and chops strongly, buzz. Ross's power of distortion hit Onigumo's cuts hard in the air, and the fist and sword did not connect perfectly but stopped about half an inch apart from each other. At its center, the collision of sword energy and the chaotic power of distortion badly interweave and collide, making a nurturing and crackling sound, as if there was static electric current in the air. Bang! The waves of sword energy and the power of distortion finally burst apart, and the aftermath of the collapse surged in all directions, leaving the deck beneath Ross and Onigumo totally disfigured and shattered. In the aftermath, Ross took 2 steps back, while Onigumo staggered the same way, stepping back 2 steps as they have almost equally hit each other with all of their strength. Devil fruit can be developed to this extent. Onigumo opened his eyes and looked at Ross with a solemn look in his eyes. He thought that he could easily catch a pirate like Ross who had never been to the Grand Line using his strength, but he didn't expect that even when pushing his haki to its limit it will result into this situation. Fighting with a West Blue pirate was somewhat unacceptable for him. He is a rear admiral who is stationed at the Grand Line Marine headquarters. And just as Onigumo started thinking about tactics, Ross attacked again. Distortion, flash, buzz. In the space around Ross, the light suddenly dimmed, and at the same time, a brilliant light suddenly came out of Ross's eyebrow, like a flash, piercing Onigumo's eyes, making his eyes painful as he involuntarily closed them. Now that the power of distortion has been able to make 2 phantom doppelgangers, it can naturally converge light in an area to form a strong flash attack. This flash not only hurt Onigumo's eyes but also made several Marines, who was watching from a distance, cover their eyes and scream, feeling a sharp pain in both of their eyes. Whiz! Ross stepped forward and punched Onigumo. Onigumo, unable to concentrate because of the pain in his eyes, was forced to fight with a sword and staggered back under Ross's punch. Bang! Bang! Ross showed no mercy. Knowing that the other party had observation haki and soru, he did not waste his stamina by moving back and forth. Instead, he fought directly, and a series of blows poured down towards Onigumo like a gale rainstorm. Onigumo has become extremely confused for a while. Although he can use armament haki to protect his body, he cannot completely resist Ross's power of distortion. With each punch, he feels extreme pain in his arms. Get away from me! After being forced to retreat for more than a dozen steps, Onigumo roared while jumping up and swept his legs across and unleashed Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, toward Ross's face, waving his swords in succession, sending out more than 10 sword energy attacks. Bang! 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 Ross raised his hand and pressed all the sword energies in front of him as if he is holding countless snakes. After a twist, all of them collapsed under the power of distortion. Onigumo's eyes have been restored, but he has given up on opening them. He was really bothered by Ross's tactics of restraining his vision. "You've pissed me off, West Blue Kid." He looked at Ross and said in a cold voice, "Do you know why I'm called Onigumo? That's because." As his voice fell, a strange momentum suddenly appeared all over him. The hair spread over his shoulders and back suddenly floated one by one. The floating hair, bundled up and twisted together, eventually turning into 6 spider-like legs. The 6 black spider's legs took out 6 swords from the coat he was wearing, and he held 8 blades in his current posture. Life return. Seimei Kikon. Ross watched the strange changes on Onigumo. His eyes flashed. His impression of Onigumo was not deep. He always thought that Onigumo has the ability of the Zone Devil Fruit model spider, but he did not think that Onigumo was a high-level body skill user. Life returns. Seimei Kikon. Ability. Even those who are proficient in Marine's Rokushiki have a little grasp on this technique. This is a top-notch body skill by which the user can freely control their body, hair, and even internal organs. You haven't been to Grand Line, but you have such knowledge that you recognize not only haki but also the life returns. Seimei Kikon. It is quite surprising. Onigumo grinned and grinned terribly. In the War of the Best in the original work, life returns, Seimei Kikon, has become Onigumo's normal skill, but now it is his ultimate stunt. In order to press Ross down, he has no reservations anymore. That appearance, can hair also move? Not far away, a group of Marines, whose eyes were pierced by Ross's attack and were painful and tearful, gradually recovered, and when they saw what Onigumo looked like, they were all shocked. One captain, who followed Onigumo from headquarters, his eyes flashed with awe and he said, "It's life return. Seimei Kikon, I've only seen it twice, but I didn't expect that Rear Admiral Onigumo would use it against Ghost Hand Ross. Rear Admiral Onigumo used this skill. This battle is probably going to end here. Some Marine, who followed Onigumo from headquarters, watched the scene and murmured in awe. On the field, Onigumo's shawl is arising and his hair is condensed to form spider legs. He holds 6 swords. He looks terrifying. Onigumo really deserves the name of Demon Spider. What you felt just now was the sword arts of the second blade stream, and now I will use 8 blade stream. His face was fierce and indifferent, and the moment his voice fell, he stepped down and rushed towards Ross. 6 swords held by Spider's legs, together with 2 swords held by his hands, slashed vertically, and the strong sword energy interwoven directly into a sword energy net. Almost at the moment when the sword energy cuts came out, he leapt into the air, swung his legs violently displaying Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, and kicked out 2 energies in the void, intertwined with the net of sword energy that fell head-on towards Ross. Disorganized sword arts. Ross motivated the power of Distortion Fruit and condensed it in his hands and pulled the net of the falling sword energy and tore it up. Though it was difficult, it was still torn by him. It's impossible for the sword arts displayed by your hair to reach the level of your hands. Ross stepped over the torn web of sword energy and went up to Onigumo, his eyes calm and indifferent, his fists swinging fast. Onigumo held 2 long swords in both hands to take Ross's fists on the front, while the other 6 swords fall towards Ross's head and face. That's true, but these 6 swords are extra, and you only have 2 hands. ZZZ. 6 long swords interlaced into a dense network of swords, which completely surrounded Ross. Even though Ross displayed kami-e, paper drawing, he still could not avoid all of them and was occasionally hit by swords. Cuts tore his clothes in an instant and left a bloodstain on his skin. But because the Distortion Fruit power can cover his entire body and the strength of the 6 swords is far less than those held in Onigumo's hand, the real damage to Ross is very slight. However, after a while, Ross still had more than 10 bloodstains on his body. His whole body was dripping with blood and he looked terrifying. Onigumo, opposite him, was also not very happy either. One of the 6 swords wrapped in his hair was completely broken, 2 were badly damaged, and only 3 swords remained intact. As for his arm, which is in the constant hard struggle with Ross, gradually develops muscle strain. In the case of life return, Seimei Kikon, Onigumo can hardly use armament haki hardening, so it is very difficult for him to resist the power of distortion. Why do you still have to resist? Fall under justice, it is your destiny. Onigumo controls 7 swords, constantly attacking Ross like a madman. The offensive is like a rainstorm whose goal is to completely tear Ross apart. Justice? Ridiculous. Ross's clothes were broken and his whole body was bleeding, but his face was still cold and calm and without any emotion. It was a terrifying sight. He punched out one punch after another, constantly smashing Onigumo's sword energy and bombarding them. In the process, although his wounds were increasing, his heart became calmer, like a spring in a quiet valley. In Ross's eyes, Onigumo's falling swords attacks gradually changed from frenzy to traceability, and he gradually seemed to be able to see the tracks of those attacks. It wasn't known when it started, but Onigumo's sword attacks started to only touch Ross's body, and then gradually Ross's body become untouchable by those swords. Ross used Soru with his feet easily. His entire body is like a fish in water. He tosses and turns around, avoiding all the sword attacks of Onigumo. Over time, Onigumo gradually realized that something was wrong. It was clear that he had an advantage, but suddenly that advantage gradually turned into a disadvantage. Ross's dodging is very similar to kami-e, paper drawing, in Marine's Rokushiki, but it is somewhat different. Kami-e, paper drawing, is only a pure state of evasion. Once you want to launch an attack, you must exit kami-e, paper drawing. Ross pays equal attention to attack and evasion, and his every action is flexible with accurate judgment. This is observation haki. Onigumo couldn't help but widen his eyes and look at Ross in front of him with an incredible look. If Ross could use observation haki, he would have used it a long time ago. There is only one possibility for him to use it now: he learned it in battle. Any haki has the possibility of a direct awakening in battle, and Onigumo has met such people who awoken their haki in a battle, but all of those people he encountered were in the Grand Line or in the New World. It never occurred to him that Ross, a pirate from West Blue, would be able to comprehend haki. How can he suddenly awaken haki without experiencing battles on the Grand Line, without experiencing life and death, without experiencing great and terrifying pressure? How can he suddenly awaken Haki? Onigumo's heart trembled. Now Ross is using the observation Haki and his tricks now have no advantage. And, due to the special nature of distortion fruit, which is similar to quake fruit, even if it can be equally divided in strength, but the twisted effect is constantly superimposed, the receiver body will be continuously affected and step by step it will fall. It's like boiling a frog in warm water. By the time Onigumo notices the seriousness of the situation, his arms are starting to feel numb. His sword arts have become very slow. Bang! As Ross dropped another punch, the armament Haki surrounding Onigumo's sword blade was forcibly dispersed and the whole sword was in a state of an unbearable burden, showing signs of twisting and fragmentation. The situation of strength and weakness has been reversed completely. Many Marines in the distance watched this scene. All of them were shocked and are in denial. It was clear to them that Onigumo had been suppressing Ross. Why did the situation suddenly change?
It seems that your justice is coming to an end.
Ross calmly watched Onigumo, who had been shocked out of his mind by him. He stepped forward and followed him directly and punched out, crushing Onigumo's sword in his left hand. Damn it, Onigumo is grinding his teeth and his face showed a grim expression. He raised his left hand and took a sword from one of his hair, trying to continue the fight with Ross, but Ross dropped another punch. His arm muscles had been severely sprained and he could no longer resist it. The punch freed both of his left and right hand's swords, and under the influence of the power of distortions, the muscles and bones were overwhelmed. If he were not in the state of life return, Seimei Kikon, it would be very difficult for him to even move his fingers. Bang! Ross took another step forward, swung his arm violently, and all the swords on Onigumo's hair were shattered and the shattered swords fall on the ship's board.
Rear Admiral Onigumo. Many Marine looked at this scene and couldn't help but scream, and all the faces were filled with horror.
Ross stared at Onigumo, who could not believe that he would fail. There was no mockery or excitement in Ross's eyes, only the dreadful calmness. He looked so coldly at Marine Rear Admiral, who was numb and unable to move. Actually, how to carry out your justice has nothing to do with me. I will not care, but if you want to put your justice on me, then I can only say, you have picked the wrong person to fight from the beginning. Kacha. The sound of the broken bones echoed on the silent deck.
Throughout battleship, there was silence. Far away.
On the other two battleships, all Marines stared at Ross and Onigumo's battleship, but it was very difficult to see clearly because of the distance. The sound seems to have stopped. Is it over? Ghost Hand Ross should be overwhelmed by Rear Admiral. Someone listened to Ross and Onigumo's battle on battleship, and the constant battle sound ceased. They could not help but look at each other and show their concern. Naturally, Rear Admiral Onigumo is a headquarters Rear Admiral of the Grand Line. Ghost Hand Ross will definitely be suppressed by Rear Admiral. The Rear Admiral of the West Blue has a cigar in his mouth as he says with a dull tone. However, almost as his voice fell, a sudden noise came from the distant battleship. The cracking of the planks and the entire hull of the ship seemed to be violently shaking under the influence of some force. What happened? Many people were startled and intent to take a closer look at it when the battleship's hull suddenly burst with an overwhelming sound and the whole ship was constantly twisted and shattered from the middle. Bang! With countless Marines staring in horror, the battleship twisted and folded in the middle and was cruelly destroyed like the previous two battleships. Battleship was destroyed. How is it possible? Rear Admiral Onigumo is on that battleship. Many Marine officers were shocked and looked incredibly at the destroyed battleship. Some even grabbed the sentry's telescope to look at it. Crash. The collapsed battleship splintered on both sides, causing a huge wave of water below it which surged in all directions.
And on the broken wreckage of the battleship, a blood-drenched figure is standing there, like a god-killer coming out of the battlefield, which is terrifying.
That is, Ghost Hand Ross. Looking at the bloody figure and judging his identity, Marines on the remaining two battleships showed horror in their faces. The ship was destroyed and Ross appeared on the wreckage. What about Rear Admiral Onigumo? Could it be that? Some people have an almost unbelievable idea in their hearts. Their eyes show a tinge of fear and they couldn't help but shake their heads with that knowledge. Impossible. No way. Onigumo is a Rear Admiral of the Marine headquarters. How is it possible for him to lose to a pirate from West Blue? However, just as the group of Marines was shocked and horrified, the blood-bathed figure suddenly stepped under his feet and jumped up coming out of the wreckage and rushed towards the two remaining battleship. He is coming. Damn. Where is Rear Admiral Onigumo? Many Marines were in shock. They still could not believe that Rear Admiral Onigumo would be defeated by Ross until Ross's figure arrived at their battleship. They began to fire at Ross with their knives and guns in panic. Bang! 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 The bullets flew, but they couldn't cause any damage to Ross. When he stepped on his feet, the ship's board was twisted and broken and he directly fell to the lower levels of the ship. Then a strong power of distortion centered on Ross's position spread in all directions as if the center of the ship had been hit by some severe impact and the ship's plates were stacked like waves. Kacha! Kacha! The fourth battleship, under Ross's power, was also totally destroyed and shattered. Withdraw! Quickly withdraw! Marines on the fifth battleship in the distance saw the tragedy of the fourth battleship and finally recovered from the incredible fear and horror. The captain on board looked at the wreckage of the battleships in horror at the distant sea. The whole battleship was in chaos. On the wreckage of the fourth battleship, Ross stood in the center of the broken ship's deck, watching the fifth battleship, which fled in the reverse direction, gasping violently and barely standing. In the fight with Onigumo, he almost consumed most of his stamina. If he hadn't finally succeeded in understanding observation hockey, even if he could still win, he would surely have won miserably. After destroying the third battleship and the fourth battleship, the remaining small part of his stamina has completely reached the bottom. Now, he has almost no power to move. If the fifth battleship had turned its cannons and fired one round, that scene would have been extremely dangerous. However, Ross had no worries. Firstly, he knew that Marine's psychological endurance on the fifth battleship was very weak when Onigumo's life and death were unknown to them and their 4 battleships were destroyed. Secondly, after killing Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo, he got another 40 talent proficiency points. If the fifth battleship really dares to fight him, it would have been no big deal to put these 40 talent proficiency points into physical enhancement for a temporary recovery. Headquarters' Rear Admiral's strength is remarkable. I underestimated him. Looking at the fifth battleship in the distance, Ross shook his head and looked at the bloodstains on his body. He couldn't help but whisper. His present physical constitution is far from ordinary people's comparison. All the bloodstain on his body are no longer bleeding and all of them are forming scabs. After a while, Robin drove the pirate ship slowly through the ruins. By the time the ship approached, Ross had recovered a little of his strength. With a hard step under his feet, he jumped up and landed on his ship's deck. Captain Ross, seeing the blood marks on Ross, Robin couldn't help but reveal a trace of surprise and quickly came forward. "It's all right." Ross waved at Robin to show that he was okay and at the same time asked her to bring the medical box and simply clean up his wound. Seeing that all the wounds on Ross were skin injuries and they were already scabbing, Robin was relieved as she made several hands and wiped Ross carefully with a cotton ball. Marine Headquarters. Inside an office on the top floor of the fortress, there is a plaque on the wall of Absolute Justice. This is Marine Headquarters Admiral Akainu's office. Akainu sits at the back of his desk with Marine Justice cloak decorated with gold shoulders, holding a document and looking at Vice Admiral Doberman standing in front of him. Doberman is reporting to him about his work. "There are no problems with these things. I am happy with your work, but..." Akainu listened to Doberman report on his recent work, first affirmed his work, but then raised his head and stared at Doberman. "What's going on in the West Blue?" As a Marine Headquarters Admiral, he oversees the overall situation of the entire sea. Although most of the time he is focused on the Grand Line and New World, he will still occasionally pay some attention to the East, the West, the North, and the South Seas. Doberman listened to Akainu's mention of West Blue, and his eyes changed slightly, bowing his head. "Because you were busy with work, I have not reported to you. I didn't expect you to hear about it. I am going to report it to you after I have finished processing it. After all, it is only a small matter of West Blue. It is not that troublesome to handle." Akainu snorted and said, "Small things. About that ghost hand Ross, but it took a lot of effort to cover it up on the part of the government and it almost made Marines look like rookies. A pirate of West Blue naturally can't get into his eyes, but if it comes to Marine's face, it's not a trivial matter. It was my mistake." Doberman bowed his head deeply and said, "I've sent Onigumo to West Blue. As he reported a few days ago, he had tracked the exact location of Ghost Hand Ross. I think he can put an end to this in the next few days." Hearing Doberman's words, Akainu's indifference converged a little. He picked up a pen, checked Doberman's papers and handed them over. Just as Doberman bent over and was about to leave, the door of the room was suddenly pushed open and a Marine captain came in sweating. Report. The West Blue Fleet, led by Rear Admiral Onigumo, suffered a heavy defeat in the fierce battle with Ghost Hand pirates. Ghost Hand Ross destroyed 4 battleships and the life and death of Rear Admiral Onigumo are unknown. The room was silent for an instant, the air is solidifying. Akainu stared at the Marine captain and turned his head. His eyes showed anger, which made the temperature of the room rise slightly. "What did you say?" The Marine captain shivered and dared not speak. The expression on Doberman's face was completely stiff and his heart was violently shaken and the documents in his hand were almost unsteady. Onigumo actually couldn't handle a West Blue pirate. An unimportant person who they thought they could handle at any time, became huge trouble for them. The impact and seriousness of the Ross incident are now beyond his expectations. Great Age of Pirates, April 11th. Ross defeated Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo at West Blue Shipwright Town, sinking 4 battleships. The news was sent back and the Marine Headquarters shook. 3 days later, Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo led a fleet from West Blue branches to pursue Ghost Hand pirates and was defeated and lost 4 battleships. His life or death is unknown. This news spread across the sea. On this day, the entire West Blue boiled. This, fake. What a joke, even the Rear Admiral sent by Headquarters. Countless people were holding the newspaper and their faces were full of horror and unbelievable looks. No one thought that a Rear Admiral that was sent from Marine Headquarters could not cope with the Ghost Hand pirates. It is more incredible that this pirate group is only a force of the West Blue and not a powerful force on the Grand Line. As the news spread, not only West Blue but also some of the pirate forces on the Grand Line also got news and the Ghost Hand pirates gathered a lot of attention. On the Grand Line, on a pirate ship of the Hapo Navy, a fat old man with a lush, gray beard and bald head in a green shirt is looking at the newspaper in his hand. He is the 12th generation leader of the Hapo Navy, Don Shinjao. Sai's death means that he's not as skilled as a man who killed him and there is nothing to say about death at sea, but it is unforgivable that he killed the next generation leader of the Hapo Navy. He tore apart the newspaper in his hand, his eyes burning with anger. "Wait for me, kid, I'll find you sooner or later." On the other side of the sea, a pirate with 90 million berries bounty took the newspaper and said, "Did he kill the Rear Admiral of Marine Headquarters? There's a great guy in the West Blue." Somewhere in a bar, a one-eyed pirate reading a newspaper while drinking grinned. "Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo. The bastard had come to chase after me before, but he died in the West Blue. Sooner or later, it looks like you'll come to Grand Line." Who knows? But Grand Line is not West Blue, so high-profile intrusion into Grand Line may not be a good thing. He has already attracted a lot of attention. In most cases, the pirate forces fight each other because there is only one big secret treasure and the king of pirates is the only that can have it, so only by defeating all competitors can someone stand on the top of the entire sea. 2 days before the completion of the new ship, inside the old ship's cabin, Ross stood in the center of 6 swinging sandbags with his eyes closed, his fists were clenched and he was beating the swinging sandbags incessantly. In his confrontation with Onigumo, although he realized and displayed the observation haki, it was not stable. It could only be regarded as a beginner level. He could only display it when he was fully absorbed and entered a special state. Haki can't be mastered without intense training and armament. Haki hardening also requires a lot of battle experience to master. The same is true for observation haki. Even after awakening it in battle, it will still require a lot of battle experience and individual practice, in order to polish it to a perfect mastery. Bang! 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 Over time, Ross was no longer confined to a fixed position but began to move gradually. He closed his eyes, threaded through a large number of swinging sandbags, hit those flipping sandbags accurately with his fists and occasionally sidestepped to avoid a few. Before my battle with Onigumo, I have always been at a disadvantage in terms of speed. Otherwise, even if Onigumo masters observation haki, I can rely on my flexibility and speed to avoid most attacks. Ross evaded the sandbags as he recalled the previous battle. Now, his speed has improved a lot compared to before. Because of the 40 talent proficiency points he got after killing Onigumo, he put all the points in the agility enhancement and now the proficiency of agility enhancement has reached 100 points, crossing the threshold towards high-level agility enhancement. In terms of speed and reaction speed, they are nearly doubled compared with the previous one. If he fought Onigumo again, even if he doesn't use observation haki, he won't need to fight to the point where the win and the loss is undetermined. Moreover, the improvement of agility enhancement brings not only speed and reaction rate but also more sensitive senses and perceptions, which greatly reduces the difficulty of practicing observation hockey for Ross. With stronger senses and perceptions, Ross can easily detect the presence of observation hockey, and he constantly tries to control it during his exercise. He wants to be able to use the observation hockey as much as he wants and not just use it instinctively in a battle. Bang! Bang! There were 12 sandbags hanging in his room. They were all swinging freely in the room at different speed. The size and directions of each sandbag were completely different. With his senses of hearing, Ross accurately avoided every sandbag and hits every falling sandbag with his fist. It's still a bit difficult to control hockey as I want. Ross kept avoiding and waving his fists, enduring the spiritual burst of fatigue until he could no longer perceive the sandbags that had hit him, and he stopped. Observation hockey does not consume much stamina, but it does consume spirit. Even Ross can only exercise by taking breaks. However, over the past 3 days, Ross has gradually found the direction to fully grasp observation hockey with his own exploration and by the points recorded in the reading notes. All that is left is practicing persistently. Just as Ross stepped out of the practice room and went back to his room, intending to take a sip of water before his short rest, Robin suddenly came from around the corner. She came over with a newspaper. "Captain Ross, in today's newspaper you occupied a big page." Ross took the newspaper from her hand and glanced at the part about himself. They were all official words: the crimes of a wicked pirate, being evil, and so on. The government is still as rubbish as ever. He shook his head and found a new bounty order from the bottom of the newspaper. Looking at the amount on the bounty order, Ross smiled a little and said, 92 million berries, at last. I am no longer a captain whose bounty is not as high as his crew. Robin's bounty is 79 million berries, which has been a bit higher than Ross's bounty, and now he finally has more bounty reward than her. Robin chuckled and said, "Sooner or later, Captain's bounty will be even higher." The new 92 million berries bounty also caused a violent earthquake in West Blue's pirate hunter circle. Together with Devil Child Nico Robin on board, Ghost Hand Pirates has a total bounty of 171 million berries. This huge bounty reward undoubtedly makes countless pirate hunters' eyes red with greed, and it also caused tremendous jealousy in a large portion of other pirates in the West Sea. But, even if they are jealous, no one dares to make a move against Ghost Hand Pirates. Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral, a fleet of 5 battleships. This lineup was completely defeated by Ross. This real terrifying record was suffocating. In the morning after 3 days, Ross is still practicing observation hockey in his practice room, same as before. Now his manipulation of observation hockey is becoming more and more perfect. He's only a short distance away from mastering this power completely. While Ross was exercising and trying to cross that short distance, Robin came to the practice room and told him that the new ship had been completely completed. "It's finished." Ross grabbed the towel, wiped his neck and forehead, and lightly stepped out of the swinging pile of sandbags, came to Robin and said, "Come on, let's go and have a look." They left the north bank and walked along the familiar streets of Shipwright Island and soon arrived at the new shipbuilding site on the west bank of Shipwright Island. Before they arrived, they saw all kinds of waste and sawdust everywhere. Obviously, in order to build a ship at full speed in 7 days, waste and other things are left in the outer ring as there is no time to transport and dispose of it. Moving forward, a 40 meters long ship came into their view as they passed through the waste. The ship's hull is dark in tone, streamlined, without any particularly high cabin. The whole ship is like a long shuttle. Looking at its appearance, it can be seen that the ship is designed to absolutely crush other wide sailing ships in terms of speed. Here you are. On the starboard side of the ship, Old Fitz was making the final measurements, noticing the arrivals off Ross and Robin. He wiped the muddy sweat from his forehead and came over. He grinned and introduced the ship to Robin and Ross. Ghost Shadow Ship. As the chief shipwright who designed the entire ship and was responsible for its construction, he is the only one who is qualified to name the ship. He guided Ross and Robin to the side of the boat, pointing to the hull design and the building path on the ship. "I cut the size of the freeboard and installed vertical triangular sails. The hull is made of heavy silverwood, strong enough to surpass any ordinary steel. Not to say whether it can reach any part of the sea, but at least among other sailing ships, no ship can surpass it in speed." Old Fitz patted his chest and showed a touch of pride. It was a ship that he had designed a long time, and now it was finally built with enough money and with a perfect keel backbone. Except for those special powered ships, none of the ships he knows can match Ghost Shadow Ship in terms of speed. What a magnificent ship! Robin looked up at the entire ghost shadow ship with a glimmer of appreciation in her eyes. Ross stood next to her, smiling. He was totally uninterested in firepower and the like. What he needed was a speed-based ship, supplemented by firmness and durability. It's a great honor to have the fastest sailing ship in the world. Ross smiled. Old Fitz waved his hand and said, "No, it should be. Without the treasure tree atom branch you got, it would not be able to withstand the pressures of design and speed. Without the tens of millions of berries, I would not be able to buy so many silverwood hulls." What's more, at this point, Old Fitz looked at Robin and paused. "I also hope that you can take Robin and leave the government and Marines far behind." Ross looked at Old Fitz and responded earnestly, "Robin is my crew member and I am responsible for all of my crew members." Old Fitz stared at Ross, and with his life experience, he could not see any sign that Ross was lying, so he grinned. "All right. Don't you want to see what it looks like? Let's go and have a look." Old Fitz boarded the deck with Ross. Since the entire ship does not have too many overtop structures, the upper level of the entire hull is extremely open and it is almost parallel to the sea level and has been neatly organized. There is enough room on the deck for a full dance party. Old Fitz smiled and led Ross and Robin into the cabin. The mid-level building belongs to the main body of the cabin and it is also very open. There is a hall-like room in the center, with counter sofas and other things, such as a ballroom. Simultaneously, a large practice room is also designed here, which is made up of golden oak and special tough steel, which is stronger than silverwood and can withstand great pressure and weight. There are also designs in places like the study room. Although there are not many books in it, Robin still shows a sunny smile. As for the bottom layer of the ship, it is a common cargo hold that can be used to store all kinds of things. There were not too many cannon muzzles on the hull. Together, there were only 8 cannon muzzles on both sides and Ross was probably too lazy to bother with even those 8. After looking at all the rooms and the entire hull, 3 of them returned to the deck. Ross looked at the deck under his feet, surprised. "Almost perfect. Ha ha ha, although I haven't built a ship for many years, I haven't forgotten how to build them." Old Fitz grinned and answered Ross's praise directly. After 2 steps, Ross turned to Old Fitz and said, "This is almost a perfect ship and the only flaw I can see is that it is lacking a shipwright." Old Fitz seemed to have guessed Ross would say that. He took the bottle out of his bosom and took a gulp of wine and intentionally went to the side of the ship and looked at the sea. "But it's even more awkward for an old man to be shipwright. I didn't go to a pirate ship when I was young and I won't go to one when I am already this old. The sea belongs to you young people." Having said that, he turned his head and there was a glimmer of sparkling in his eyes. "I only hope that you can take this ship and take Olivia's child away from the government." Ross was not surprised by Old Fitz's words. Red Hair Shanks's ship was designed and built by him and he didn't board Shanks' ship. The only one that can make him willing go on board as a shipwright is Robin, but the possibility is very low. "Pity." Ross shook his head and stopped inviting. Old Fitz looked at Ross and Robin and laughed, then slowly walked down the gangway at a slightly faltering pace. Ross looked at the sea in the distance, his eyes twinkling for a moment as he turned to Robin and said, "With a new ship, it's time for us to get some new crew members. Next I need 2 pieces of intelligence, one about the whereabouts of Double Sword Pirates of West Blue who has a bounty of 59 million berries, and the other for Demon Sheriff Lafitte's whereabouts." This is also Ross's final mission before leaving West Blue and embarking on the Grand Line. The Double Sword Pirates are the prey that Ross had chosen a long time ago. As for Demon Sheriff Lafitte, he was one of the main crew member and the navigator of the Blackbeard Pirates in the original work. Now that we want to turn the world upside down, we can just add fire to the group by pulling an evil clown. Besides, Ross has always wanted to find a navigator and does not want to work as a captain and a navigator. Every day, besides practice, he spends a lot of time observing the weather and drawing sea map. Nami is currently too small and far away in the East Blue, and Lafitte, who should be living in the West Blue, is undoubtedly a good choice for a navigator. The only problem is how to get that person on board. At this point, Ross is not going to rush to think about it, at least he is going to meet him first. The shipbuilding area is not far from the coast. After the ship was completed and Ross and Robin saw it, Old Fitz commanded several other shipwrights to pull the long and thick ropes towards the coast. Ross watched as they struggled to pull the ropes and shook his head and walked to the stern position, pressing one hand on the stern and pushing forward. Buzz. Originally a large group of shipwrights pulled the ship desperately to move it forward bit by bit. The same ship is now being pushed forward by Ross with one hand and the ship glided forward on the sand. Wow, wow. It's moving. Many shipwrights and porters pulling the ship in front noticed that something was wrong. Looking back, they found that the whole ship was moving forward and they could not help but scream as they moved to both sides. When many shipwrights and porters saw that it was Ross who was propping up the stern of the ship with only one hand, driving the whole ship forward, they could not help but stare at the old man. This guy, is he still human? A single man is pushing the entire ship forward. What kind of strength it is? Only the giants are able to do that. A short time ago, a naval battle took place near the north coast. Although the shipwrights and porters knew about it, they did not know the exact details. They always thought that it was a group of pirates and marines who exchanged fire and the pirates finally killed the marines. Crash. Ross pushed the ship to move fast. After a moment, he pressed his hands on the stern of the ship and pushed it even harder. The whole boat slammed forward, cut open the waves and went into the sea. After the ship entered the sea, Old Fitz boarded the ship again and went to the bottom of the ship to inspect it. After finding that there was no problem, he returned to the shore. The porters on the shore and the handymen on the Ross's ship are rushing to carry all kinds of goods, most of which are fresh water and food, as well as other materials from the old ship. By noon, everything was finally settled. Bon voyage. Old Fitz stood on the dock, waving at the ghost shadow ship which was gradually moving away with the wind. There was a glimmer of light in his muddy eyes and as he thought this should be the last ship he built which is heading out into the sea. Ross looked at Old Fitz on the shore, smiled as he looked at the shrinking harbor, he turned around and looked at the boundless sea in front of him. So, the world's fastest sailing ship is here. The world government and marines treat me as someone who can be easily eliminated by them. I don't know if you are ready. Half a month later. West Blue, somewhere on the western edge of an island. Nico Robin came to the edge of the cliff and looked at the ghost shadow ship, which was parked not far below, and jumped forward. Countless arms flew out of her arms and combined into a small wing that fanned as she fell. With a slight impact, Robin fell lightly onto the deck. You came back so soon. Ross was sitting in front of a set of tables and chairs on the deck, watching Robin fall lightly on the deck and he leaned back on his chair and relaxed his leg muscles again. Thanks to my good luck, I have acquired information on both matters. Robin came over with a smile on his face. There is a reward for meritorious service. Ross sat up straight and chuckled. Robin smiled at him and said, "What's the reward? Next time you come ashore, fill up all the shelves in your study." Ross snapped his finger. Then I would have to thank Captain first. Robin slightly smiled and regained her serious expression and said to Ross, "As for the double sword pirates, just yesterday, a great event happened in Yates Sea area. The double sword pirates defeated the marine fleet of T6 base." Oh, Ross's eyes flashed slightly and he said, "These double sword pirates are good enough to defeat a marine base fleet of West Blue." Currently, in the West Blue, there are not many pirates who have a bounty of more than 30 million berries, and because Ross has killed many of them and he even killed pirates who had a bounty of 20 million berries, the pirate force has entered a state of recession. And now in this period, the double sword pirates defeated an entire marine fleet, which is undoubtedly once again inspiring West Blue's evil forces. No, it's not just about strength. Robin shook her head and said with slight solemnity, "It took only 3 years for the double sword pirates to rise up and cross the West Sea. When they defeated an entire naval fleet, it also revealed a piece of important information." "What kind of information?" Ross asked. Robin responded, "Double Sword, who is the captain of the Double Sword Pirates, has a bounty of 59 million berries, but he is not the real captain of the Double Sword Pirates. There is a hidden existence in the Double Sword Pirates." Interesting. Ross had an interesting look on his face. Robin took a deep breath and looked solemnly. The existence behind the scene is the captain of the Ghost Sword Pirates on the Grand Line, Ghost Sword. 3 years ago, the Ghost Sword Pirates were ambushed and defeated by Marines in the Grand Line. Marines claimed that the Ghost Sword Pirates had been destroyed by their whole army. But the captain of the Ghost Sword Pirates did not die, but fled the Grand Line and returned to the West Blue. As a behind-the-scenes presence, he created the Double Sword Pirates. His former bounty is 98 million berries. At this point, Robin looked seriously at Ross and said, "Shall we change our plan and not collide head-on with the Double Sword Pirates?" She knew that Ross was eyeing the Double Sword Pirates, but the Double Sword Pirates were obviously a big problem. Their captain could escape to the West Blue under the Marine encirclement, and then he supported West Blue's top pirate group, his mind and strength are obviously not to be underestimated. No, we are still going ahead according to the original plan. Ross chuckled and said, if we are going to change our plans because of someone who got defeated on the Grand Line, then how can we go to the Grand Line? Robin knew that she could not possibly change Ross's decision. She did not reveal any unexpected expression. Instead, she smiled and said, then there's the second information, about Demon Sheriff Lafitte, a former security officer who was deported by the state because of abuse of his authority. Coincidentally, this former sheriff and the position of the double sword pirates are on the same sea. Isn't that just right? Ross stood up and took out the sea map. It's better to accomplish two goals at once. Where are they? Water Gold Sea, Robin responded softly. Ross nodded and looked at the sea map. He took out the compass and judged their position. He said, it's not far. At the speed of Ghost Shadow ship, if we go at full speed, we can reach that sea in about 5 days. So, turn the rudder, hang the sails, let's go to the Water Gold Sea. Damn. Why bother appearing again and again in West Blue? In Vice Admiral's office in Marine Headquarters, Doberman looked at a document on his desk, listened to the reports from his subordinates and couldn't help but yell at it. Previously, because of Ghost Hand Ross, he was reprimanded by Akainu and was almost driven out of Marine Headquarters to pursue Ross himself. Now, only half a month after Ross's incident, double sword pirates emerged. To replace the captain with a fake, that bunch of bastards from the G8 branch base. After reading the report carefully, Doberman could not help but shout angrily at the G8 base on Grand Line. Apparently, the G8 branch base defeated Ghost Sword pirates but failed to capture the Captain Ghost Sword. Someone grabbed a fake one to replace the original for military merits. Now that things have been revealed, the other side has directly put forward the push-off method, indicating that they do not know anything. Under such circumstances, it is impossible to directly dismiss the responsible Marines from their posts and prosecute them, and at the worst, they would be criticized for being tricked by pirates and some of their military merits are going to be deducted. Vice Admiral Doberman, what should we do? Unless a base commander on the Grand Line leads the team, the problem known as the Ghost Hand Pirates will not be solved at all. The Double Sword Pirates are also difficult for anyone in the West Blue to deal with. A Rear Admiral, who oversees the West Blue, asks a question.
It is impossible to dispatch a Grand Line's Vice Admiral to the West Blue, which will cause problems in the deployment of the Grand Line forces, and the admirals will not agree with it.
Doberman's hand slammed on his forehead. On one hand, is the Double Sword Pirates, and on another is much more troublesome pirates, which are the Ghost Hand Pirates. He never thought that the West Blue would be so difficult to deal with. Just then, a Rear Admiral next to him suddenly thought of something and whispered, Vice Admiral Doberman, after the Ghost Hand Pirates replaced their ship in the shipwright town, their latest course seemed to coincide strangely with that of Double Sword Pirates. Oh, Doberman was slightly shocked, thinking about Ross's whereabouts. He knew that Ross targets both Marine and Pirate, which made him think a little. If the Ghost Hand Pirates and the Double Sword Pirates encounter each other, they may fight to kill each other, and it is likely that both of them will be injured. Then there may be a slight chance for us. Let the nearest West Blue branch be ready to monitor their actions and always supervise their actions. Let the orders be clear that no one is going to act without authorization.
Yes, the Rear Admiral replied. Ghost Shadow ship, practice room.
More than 10 heavy sandbags of different sizes were hanging there and swinging constantly. Ross had his eyes closed, but as if he could see in all directions, he avoided every sandbag with great precision. More than half a month has passed since Ghost Shadow ship was built, and Ross's observation hockey has been thoroughly mastered. In the Talent System's interface, observation hockey's branches have become activated gold. Today, he alternates between 10 or more sandbags, which is as simple as eating and drinking water for him. Even if it is bullets, he can easily avoid them by using observation hockey.
Other than that, Ross has not put down his physical strength strengthening exercise and the Devil Fruit ability exercise. Distortion Fruit and physical fitness have slightly improved. His power of distortion range has become a little larger.
Distribution Fruit, a Devil Fruit, seems to have innumerable development capabilities in the talents tree of the talent system, but it is not so simple to operate in practice. Ross tried to develop the gravity distortion ability without the systematic upgrade of the system, but he ultimately failed. His power of distortion could not even touch the imaginary gravity. Obviously, it is very difficult to shift from the material distortion to distorting illusory forces. Without the talent system, it would probably be impossible to do it at all, just like White Bear's Tremor Fruit. Gura no mi. No matter how powerful it is, it will not shatter the real space and time. It will only shatter the atmosphere. But Ross was able to distort the direction of the sound. Ross has made a little progress. The doppelganger phantom has become much more confusing. Compared with gravity, the sound is still more traceable.
Almost there. Ross exercised for a while in the practice room with constantly swaying sandbags, then he walked out of it and came to the corner of the room, with several extremely heavy loads on his back and started to do simple push-ups and squats.
He had previously thought about using sea stone to exercise, but when he killed Capone Bede, he forgot to collect sea stone poles and bullets. Later, it became very troublesome to buy them again. After several islands, they could not even be bought on the underground black market. Who? In the constant ups and downs, Ross, who was naked in the upper body, began to sweat which dripped constantly on the cold floor. The weight he carries is a very special mineral material in the world. It is very sturdy, but its weight is higher than that of steel. A small piece of this material weighs similar to a large piece of steel.
With his current physical ability, carrying a large load of this weight on him is also a very effective method to exercise. 131, 132.
Ross kept counting in his mind. Half an hour later. After 1,000 push-ups, Ross got up and drank some water. After 10 minutes of rest, he started another 1,000 practice squats. His training for physical fitness was one group at a single time and 1,000 of it. When 1,000 squats were done, even with his physical strength, he was breathless, so after a little rest, he took a shower and suspended practicing. Leaving the practice room, Ross arrived on the upper deck. Robin was sitting on one side of the deck reading elegantly, while the ship's handyman was busy cleaning the deck, afraid to become lazy. "We will reach the Goldwater Sea in one day." Ross came to the place where Robin was sitting, took out the compass and the sea map and put it on the table. After measuring it for a while, he judged their current position and asked Robin, "What about the islands there?" According to the collective intelligence, Water Gold Sea is a chaotic sea. There are no countries. There are 21 islands, one of which is a large island, 6 medium-sized islands, and the other 14 are small islands. Robin made a statement about the information on the Water Gold Sea, which she had collected before and combined with Ross's sea map judgment. She quickly determined the location of each island. Ross bypassed a small island in front of him and pointed to a medium-sized island in the rear. "This small island only has one small town, so we don't need to go there. This is a chaotic sea without a country. Here the forces of underground are complex and any kind of information can be easily obtained." Robin nodded. 2 days later, Ghost Shadow ship arrived at the designated island and anchored near a remote cliff. Ross and Robin went towards the island to collect more information. The collection of information was easier than he imagined, although neither of them had gathered any information about the exact location of Demon Sheriff Lafitte. The location of the double sword pirates was determined. Water Island. This sea is called the Water Gold Sea because of the names of the two largest islands here. One is called Water and the other one is called Gold. Among them, Gold Island is the largest island, which is large enough to accommodate a country, while Water Island is second only to the Gold Island, which can be measured between a medium-sized island and a large-size island. Ross and Robin boarded the island and were walking down the street. The street style here is very dark. Whether it is a pedestrian or a beggar who is kneeling in the corner, their eyes are fierce. Compared to Kano country, which is still somewhat orderly, here is a pure disorderly zone. Some of the underground forces of the West Blue controls the situation here and the Capone family was originally one of them. However, due to their heavy losses against Ross, their power has dropped and they have already withdrawn from here. Bang! Suddenly, a gun-firing sound came from the front, causing countless people on the street to show vigilant eyes as they noticed a thin man with a gun in his hand and a strong man lying in a pool of blood in front of him. He sneered twice and turned away. "Sure enough, it's a lawless place," Ross said plainly, as both Ross and Robin have been in the dark world of the underground and these types of situations are nothing new to them, so they were not surprised. After walking for a while, they came to a busy street. Ross looked around and said, "Let's gather information separately and come back here in half an hour." "No problem." Robin lowered her hat and gently nodded. Although she rarely trains, Ross occasionally points out various methods to develop her devil fruit. Now she has no problem dealing with pirates with a bounty of 20 or 30 million berries, and because of the special abilities of her devil fruit, she can completely ignore large-scale battles. Ross and Robin separated. After walking for a while, he saw a tavern in front of him. He put his hands in his pockets and went to the counter to order a glass of wine. He asked casually. I heard that double-sword pirates have appeared on this town recently? Shish. Behind the counter, a beautiful woman was startled when she heard Ross's words. After putting the wine in, she lowered her voice and whispered, "What do you want?" Ross smiled and put 2 gold coins on the table and said, "Just want to inquire about it. It seems that you know something." The price of a glass of wine here is at most 1 silver coin. When she sees 2 gold coins, the woman's eyes suddenly started to shine and she smiled at Ross. She accepted the 2 gold coins without any hesitation. Then she leans slightly down and muffles her voice. They came here 2 days ago and fought with many people when they left. They killed dozens of people. The bodies were everywhere and it took a long time to clean them up. It was a group of terrifying guys. It's said that even an entire Marine's fleet was destroyed by them. Speaking of this, the women paused and looked at Ross sitting there wearing a leather cap showing only half of his face and whispered, "They seem to be recruiting people near the West Bank. It is said that one needs to have some strength to join them. You are not planning to join them, are you?" "Near the West Bank? Thank you very much." Ross took a sip of wine, stood up and looked up to the women behind the counter and slightly smiled before saying, "As for me joining them, they can't afford it." As his voice dropped, Ross turned and left the tavern. The women looked at Ross's back and her eyes widened slightly. As Ross stepped out of the tavern, she suddenly reacted and grabbed a stack of wanted posters beside the table and turned them upside down one by one and quickly pulled out one of them. Looking at the familiar face, she could not help breathing a cold breath.
The bounty of 92 million berries. Ghost Hand Ross.
In the past 2 days, the 2 most terrifying pirates of West Blue have arrived on this island. Today, the Ghost Hand Pirates and the Double Sword Pirates are far superior to other pirates in the West Blue. If they collide, it would definitely cause a big event that will alarm the entire West Blue. At the separation point, Ross came back here early and waited a moment before he saw Robin coming from the other direction. She came to Ross and lowered her voice and said, "Double Sword Pirates are recruiting people at their large fleet stationed near the West Bank. Demon Sheriff Lafitte. It is said that someone has seen him in this town in the last few days." "Oh, Lafitte is here too." Ross looked at Robin unexpectedly and thought a little. Then he said, "It's just right that the normal people of the island hear that Ghost Hand Ross is confronting the Double Sword Pirates. There's no reason to avoid this big scene. Let's go directly to the West Bank." Robin nodded as Ross thought exactly the same as her. Ross flicked his finger and he pushed his cap down from the front and moved forward. Almost everyone on the street is wearing rags and the atmosphere is depressed and dark. Almost everyone is staring at the 2 people on the street, as Ross and Robin, who are dressed up in a different way, are naturally the focus of their attention. When Ross flicked on the top of his hat, he stared at various people in secret and he could hear shocked sound coming from many corners of the street. "That guy is Ghost Hand Ross. It's really him." Almost at the same moment, the atmosphere of the street changed dramatically. Ross and Robin walked forward and nobody dared to stand in their way. They all retreated back on both sides. Most people did not even dare to look at Ross for fear of causing trouble. Compared to the captain of Double Sword Pirates, who has been anonymous for many years, the name of the ghost hand that recently swept through West Blue is undoubtedly more awe-inspiring and fearful. The streets became unobstructed. Ross took Robin across the street and headed all the way towards the West Bank. Those who could sense Ross's direction along the way could not help but think of something and stare at their back shocked.
They seem to be going towards the West Bank. What is there in the West Bank? Most people are very clear that the Double Sword Pirates are recruiting powerful people to board ships in the West Bank. Will Ghost Hand Ross is going to join the Double Sword Pirates?
The answer is no doubt a no. It is rumored that the captain of Ghost Hand Pirates, Ghost Hand Ross, has always had the hobby of hunting the strong. West Blue originally had a large number of pirates with the bounty of more than 20 or 30 million berries and he killed most of them. So far, no new person has come up to take their positions.
Now that Ghost Hand Ross is heading towards the West Bank to find the Double Sword Pirates, his goal is already clear to most. He most likely regards the Double Sword Pirates, which regained the first position of West Blue, as prey.
Ghost Hand Ross is going after the Double Sword Pirates? This is big news. If they fought, the outcome is really hard to predict. One is a person who killed a rear admiral that was sent by the Marine headquarters and the other person has been to the Grand Line. Many people looked at Ross's back and murmured with a tremor in their hearts. "I think that Ghost Hand Ross has a better chance of winning. It was a Marine's headquarters rear admiral that he destroyed recently and not a branch rear admiral that other pirates destroyed. Someone spoke quietly. One person shook his head and replied, Ghost Sword's bounty is 98 million berries, and this was 3 years ago. On the other hand, Ghost Hand Ross has never been to the Grand Line. Grand Line is known as the pirate graveyard. Many of the most powerful pirates in the East, West, North, and the South Blue couldn't do anything in the Grand Line and they died there. Ghost Sword entered the Grand Line and had a bounty of 98 million berries, then he returned to the West Blue. His strength is undoubtedly terrible. As Ross moved closer to the West Bank, even the underground forces, who controlled the island, were shaken by the news. For a time, the eyes of the whole island are focused on West Bank. About 10 miles away from the island, a battleship slowly stops there. The highest officer of the battleship, a rear admiral of the West Blue branch, put his hands on the guardrails of the deck and looked far in the direction of the island where only one black spot could be seen. His expressions are extremely tense and grave. Do we have eyes on the Ghost Hand pirates and Double Sword pirates? Headquarters ordered him to remain on standby here. Once there was a situation where both sides were wounded or one side died and one side was seriously injured, he would immediately appear and suppress both sides down so he could not help feeling nervous. If he could finish the mission, he would acquire enough military credits to get him transferred to headquarters as a rear admiral and it would not be a big problem to become a vice admiral after a few years. Although it's shameful to watch pirates kill each other and take advantage of their situation, history is always written by the winners. Once the mission is completed, it can be reported to the world that a Marine defeated the Ghost Hand pirates and Double Sword pirates. On the west bank of the island, there aren't many ships docked here, because there are 3 large ships at the dock that are comparable in size to Marine battleship, all flying the flag of pirates with 2 swords. Unlike Ross's elite route, the Double Sword pirates follows a fleet route, with a large enough number of people and large sailing ships to fight head-on with any general battleship. Naturally, although the number of pirates of the Double Sword pirates is huge, not everyone can be recruited and at the very least they must have a certain level of strength to join. At this moment, there are many pirates of Double Sword's pirates and many people trying to join them. In the middle of the field, a strong pirate with a long scar is standing. As long as you can take 3 punches from me and still stand, you can join us. Who else wants to try? His hands were folded in front of him, his head held high as he stood there with imposing manners. People gathered here looked at each other and soon someone came out of the crowd on their own initiative and put on a guarded stance, and said, Will we really be able to join the crew by taking 3 punches? Yes, my strength is generally average on board, so it will suffice if you can block my 3 punches. It looks like you are ready. The pirate grinned and suddenly showed a fierce expression. He stepped forward and punched the man who tried to join. Boom! The man tried to block the blow by folding his arms in front of him, but the force of the punch was obviously beyond his expectation. Under the punch, the bones on his arms cracked and he flew backward, bleeding out of his mouth. What, so weak? The fist-wielding pirate saw this scene and he was very disappointed by the results and then looked at the others with a grin and said, Who else wants to try it? Our Double Sword pirates are going to the Grand Line soon. This is your last chance to join us.
All the people gathered here looked at each other for a while, and many of their faces showed fear. After hesitation, they retreated and did not go up.
Some people are eager to join the Double Sword pirates, but the rule of blocking 3 punches of the pirate in front of them left them discouraged. No one? The pirate stood there with an expression of discontent on his face. Yesterday another man stood here alone, but there have been many people who have come up to challenge him. Today, it's his turn and no one has come up to fight. As soon as they come up, you break all of their bones with your strongest punch. Only someone who has muscles for a brain would dare to come up. Pirates were laughing and scolding at him behind his back. Ah, is that true? The pirate grabbed his hair and showed a trace of embarrassment, but still forced his mouth to say, The last punch was not my strongest, anyway I can't help but use all my strength and that guy is not qualified to join us. Just as the group of pirates laughed at each other, a sudden new crowd gathered behind the already existing crowd. A young man in a leather cap separated from the crowd and walked all the way forward.
Every person's eyes quickly looked at him. Oh, someone is coming up.
Then the pirate turned and looked at Ross, who was slightly thinner than he was, with his stout arms in front of him. He grinned. This time I will not use my full strength.
At the moment his voice fell, a bloodthirsty look flashed through his eyes and he swung a fierce punch at Ross, saying that he wouldn't use his full strength, but the current punch is not any bit weaker than the previous punch.
Boom. Just when many people thought that Ross was going to fly out by blocking the punch like the previous one, the pirate's punch was slammed and steadily accepted, and Ross only slightly raised his hand to block it. This, blocked? The crowd of onlookers showed surprise. It was surprising that Ross, who was not well built, could block such a heavy punch with one hand. Obviously, it was somewhat incredible. Many of the pirates leaning towards the shore were stunned, and they were surprised. They didn't expect that anyone could block the punch of the big man so easily. Quickly, one of the many pirates stepped into the arena. He was a double-sword pirate's cadre in charge of receiving new members. Ross could block the big man's full punch with one hand, so he will be able to block the remaining two punches easily. Obviously, he was fully qualified to join them. "Hey, what's your name?" "Ross." Ross responded plainly.
The cadres of pirates slightly frowned. He thought that the name was somewhat familiar, but he grinned. "Ross. Congratulations, you can join our double-sword pirates."
However, as he said this, suddenly there was a silence in the field.
All the voices seemed to be pinched, and if a needle fell to the ground at this moment it could be heard clearly. In this silence, the atmosphere gradually became strange.
No one was shocked, no one was envious, and countless pairs of eyes stared at Ross in the field. Their eyes were constantly changing. Most of them were stunned as if they had seen something incredible.
There was silence. "Did you make a mistake?" Ross calmly looked at the pirate's cadre in front of him and said, "When did I say I wanted to join you? Or say, are you going to invite me as a captain?"
In the past, if someone dared to say this, many pirates will immediately kill him, but now with the strange atmosphere in the field, the cadre and the pirates of the double-sword pirates are also aware that something is wrong. He looked at Ross's face and his smile faded away. A drop of cold sweat gradually overflowed from his forehead and slowly flowed down to his cheek. You are, I have already said my name, but most people like to call me Ghost Hand." Ross's gentle said, and as his voice fell, his 5 fingers slightly exerted themselves. Kacha. Kacha. A strange force spread along his fingertips. The horrified eyes of the big pirate who was punched by Ross was instantly filled with pain. A scream was stiffly strangled in his throat, but before he could call it out, his bones made a few twisting sounds as he turned into a pool of mud and fell to the ground.
Hiss. The surrounding crowd took a cold breath in fear seeing this horrifying scene. All the people gathered here are involuntarily retreating. In a flash, a large open space opened up. Ghost Hand, Ross. The double-sword pirate's cadres looked sweaty at the young man in front of him. If he could not recognize Ross at this time, he would not be a cadre of the double-sword pirate group. Looking at the tragic situation of the big man, he gritted his teeth and said, "There is no interactions between double swords pirates and your Ghost Hand pirates. Are you looking for war? The person who punches me will naturally die," Ross easily said, and at the same time, he retracted his hand, which was being stared at in horror by countless people. It looked plain, but it was the palm of the Ghost Hand. He looked calmly at the 2 double-sword pirates in front of him and said, "As for war, if you are willing to surrender, there's no need to go to war." Submission. What a joke, the cadres of the double swords pirates, gritted his teeth. He also had a bounty of 10 million berries on his head. But before the Ghost Hand, his body was still stiff and oppressed. It was difficult to pull out his weapon while facing Ross directly. Ross slowly walked forward, extending a hand and pressing towards the head of the cadre of the double sword pirates. His eyes were calmed as he said, "If you don't want to surrender, you can die." The cadre and the other pirates of the double-sword pirates wanted to pull out their weapons to resist, but they were stiff and their instinct wanted them to run away. Their legs were filled with lead. They could not move at all. They watched as Ross's hands pressed down. At this moment, 2 swords made of energy suddenly came from the direction of the shore and shrouded Ross's figure in the sword energy. Kacha. Ross stretched out his hand and slanted, accurately shooting at the point where the 2 sword energies intersected, and the 2 longitudinal sword energies twisted and broke instantly. A man with 2 slender swords in his hand and wearing white ceremonial cloths appeared on the shore and slowly walked towards them. "It's not good to bully my subordinates," Ghost Hand's Ross. With his appearance, the atmosphere in the field suddenly changed. Captain of the double sword pirates, Double Sword Derlot. Some people whispered in fear. Before Ross was born and the ghost sword appeared, Derlot was the first pirate to hold the highest bounty in the West Blue. Later, Ross swept the West Blue and Ghost Sword emerged from behind the scenes. His name was gradually obscured.
But there is no doubt that the captain of the Double Sword Pirates was once the strongest pirate in West Blue, and he still has that fearsome strength and reputation. Suspended bounty of 59 million berries, Double Swords Derlot. If I was still a pirate hunter, I might be interested in your head, as for now. Ross said in a gentle tone, and as his voice fell, a strange force suddenly spread from his legs and poured into the earth. Puff! On the ground just ahead of Ross, the soil suddenly twisted and surged, wrapping the cadre of the Double Sword Pirates rescued by Derlot in it and squeezing him into the center in horror. Looking at this scene, the expression of the Double Sword Derlot instantly cooled down. He stopped and looked at Ross and coldly said, "All those who dare to provoke the Double Sword Pirates are dead." "That's a coincidence." Ross suddenly smiled and said, "What I want to do now is either destroy you or be destroyed by you." "Very good." Double Sword Derlot was angry, and the image of Ross in his eyes has become that of a madman. He coldly said, "When you go to the Grand Line, you will probably have to fight with me. In that case, it's better to win or lose in West Blue." The moment his voice fell, he inserted the two swords back into their sheaths at his waist, then suddenly stepped forward and pulled them out at a nearly invisible speed. Two sword flow, Iajutsu, quick draw, two extremely fast sword energies flew towards Ross's position, intending to cut him directly into pieces. "They are fighting. I don't know who will win." Seeing the Double Sword Derlot and Ghost Hand Ross finally started to fight, the large crowd that has long since withdrawn towards a long distance away as they looked at the fight between Ross and Derlot from afar, they cannot help but reveal a bit of tension and attention. Although Ross's bounty has gone up to 92 million berries and his name is feared in the West Blue, the Double Sword Derlot is not an easy opponent, and both of their strength and names are famous, so no one knew who will be the winner. On the field, two swords of energy surged in. In terms of sword energy alone, the power behind the two swords is not far from that of Onigumo's, but there is armament hockey involved in Onigumo's attack, which is far from Derlot's. So for Ross, this type of sword energy is almost no threat. ZZ. Under the watchful eyes of countless people, Ross raised his hand and pointed it directly at the center of the intersection of the two sword energy. The two flying sword energies were forcibly contained, and after a slight distortion, they turned into many small light spots. This time, many people are shocked and their pupils shrank sharply, revealing an incredible look. "My attack." Looking at this scene, Derlot's face also showed some surprise. His attack, no matter in terms of speed or power, was almost the fastest, but Ross not only responded to it, he also easily resisted it. Ghost Hand Ross's strength is somewhat unfathomable. Sand coffins. After blocking Derlot's attack, Ross opened his palm and gave it a direct shake. In addition to the light distortion, distribution fruit's ability can only be extended by conduction of matter, and in this beach environment, the power of distortion can naturally be spread far and wide with the help of sand. Crash bang. The sand beneath Derlot's feet suddenly twisted and surged, twisting and twisting toward him. Weird tricks. As Ross had just killed his subordinate cadres with this trick, Derlot was on guard, but he still felt troubled by the sudden entanglement of sand. He rushed out of the scattered the sand without giving the sand a chance to wrap him up. He charged directly towards Ross. Two swords flow, fury slash. He put the two swords horizontally and rushed toward Ross. The two sword energy were mixed together and turned into a powerful sword energy sweep. "Is this your strongest attack?" Ross's voice was calm when he faced the sword energy sweep. He reached out with both hands and grasped the energy forcibly between his hands, then squeezed it toward the center. Buzz. Under the influence of distortion fruit, the grand sword energy was expelled into a ball of glittering light consisting of sword filaments. The next moment, Ross held the sword ball in one hand as he stepped out in one step, directly transforming into a shadow as he charges towards Derlot. Derlot was sure that he was not Ross's opponent when Ross defeated his attack empty-handed. He did not hesitate to step back when he saw Ross rushing towards him. But, just as he pulled back, the sand under his feet rushed towards him, wrapping around his ankles. Although he broke away from the entanglement of the sand, he was delayed for some time, and Ross had already rushed up to him and pressed the sword energy ball down on him. Derlot's pupils contracted sharply as he could not avoid Ross's attack. He could only bite his teeth and roar, laying his swords crosswise in front of him and cut hard at the sword energy ball. ZZZ. The sword chopped on the ball of sword energy that was crushed by the power of distortion. A sharp sizzling sound came from the sword like fire being mixed in the water. Derlot's two swords trembled with his arms as they were under tremendous pressure. About 2 seconds later, Ross pressed the sword energy ball, which Durlot did his best to resist. Finally, the energy of the ball was exhausted its powers and broke into many light spots. Durlot was relieved. But, nearly the next moment, Ross's fingers were gently placed in the middle of Durlot's two swords and he pinched those swords with his fingers. With a buzz, a twisting force erupted and spread up along the blade and covering Durlot with it. Not good. Durlot was shocked and hurriedly released the handle of the sword, but he was still affected by the power of distortions. His bones and muscles twisted and his whole arms blew up and blood flew out. The double sword Durlot is defeated. There was absolutely no need to fight. He is weak compared to Ross. Someone whispered and there was a bit of shock in his eyes. From Ross's fight with Durlot and to Durlot's defeat, there were only a few attacks. Even looking at the crowd from afar, most of them are more optimistic about Ross's victory, but this quick scene of the victory and defeat still made many people surprised. Ross is stronger than Durlot. Cough. Cough. Blood spilled from Durlot's mouth without stopping. Looking into Ross's eyes, he finally showed fear as he struggled to get up. Ross didn't intend to give the loser a chance to survive. With a gentle step under his feet, the sand and gravel on the shore surged like a wave, wrapping the struggling Durlot in it. Immediately afterward, Ross reached out his hand in Durlot's direction and shook it violently in the air. Boom! A frightening and palpitating voice sounded in the sand as if it had broken something. Blood slowly overflowed from the twisted sand and there were no signs of life. At the same time, Ross's ear sounded a familiar system sound. Hanging bounty of 59 million berries, double sword Durlot has been defeated, received a reward of 70 talent proficiency points and 1 free talent point. This is the first time Ross had killed a pirate whose bounty is between 50 million and 100 million berries. There are a lot of talent proficiency points and even 1 free talent point. After killing double sword Durlot, Ross ignored the horrified and fearful eyes in the distance and looked up at a ship on the shore, precisely to the top of the mast of the ship. There, a man wearing a cloak and carrying a sword is sitting there quietly. He is the behind-the-scenes controller of the double sword pirates, with a bounty of 98 million berries, Ghost Sword Yarrow. Even when Durlot was defeated and erased by Ross, he did not make a move but sat there looking at the fight with great interest. He was looking at Ross. Very soon, the crowd in the far field also turned their heads with Ross's eyes, looking up at the top of the mast of a ship on the coast, and they saw a figure clad in a cloak. Ghost Sword Yarrow. Someone called out the name of the man clad in the cloak subconsciously. At the same time, he took a deep breath and showed awe on his face. In this great age of pirates, there is almost no one that doesn't know the existence of the Grand Line, and for most of the people, the Grand Line is a place where legends and nightmares coexist. West Blue is one of the origins of pirates. In the past decade, there have been countless pirates of all kinds, but it is only Red Hairshanks that has become famous and more powerful on the Grand Line. Even to the extent that more than 95% of the pirates fell on the Grand Line and were buried there, becoming a signpost and warning signs for later generations. Like the Ghost Sword Yarrow, he is one of the pirates who made a name for themselves on the Grand Line and then returned to the West Blue. Looking at the entire West Blue, only a few have accomplished this feat. Very good, very good. Ghost Sword Yarrow, clad in a cloak, sat at the top of the mast of the ship and looked at Ross. Suddenly, he smiled slightly and jumped down from the mast and landed on the shore. Ghost Sword Yarrow, who fell to the shore, was less than 30 meters away from Ross. He walked up to Ross and stopped about 10 meters away from him, without even looking at Durlot's body buried in the sand. It seems that you don't care about your crew. Ross looked at the calm expressions on Ghost Sword Yarrow's face, who was standing 10 meters away, and said. Ghost Sword shook his head and said, "No, it should be said that no one has been removed from my list of crew." At this point, he paused and looked at Ross with great interest and said, "If you can kill Durlot so easily, you're far more powerful than most of the waste from the West Blue. So, your goal must be the Grand Line?" Ross looked at the young man in the cloak and did not reply. Instead, he calmly opened his mouth and said, "If you come here just to say such nonsense, then I don't think you need to waste more of your time." "Hey!" Ghost Sword Yarrow snorted and said disapprovingly. "Why are you so anxious? We have plenty of time before entering the Grand Line. What I want to tell you is, the horrors of the Grand Line are far more terrible than you can imagine. Even if a large fleet is formed, there is a danger that the whole army will disappear at any time. Now in the West Blue, the only worthwhile pirate in the new generation that I can see is you. Are you interested in a partnership? Not interested. Ross's tone was flat. Ghost Sword Yarrow grabbed his hair and looked at Ross seriously. He said, I am very serious. It is just a partnership. Our status will be equal. Don't you want to consider it? Speaking of this, he shrugged helplessly and said, I really don't want to kill a talented newcomer like you in West Blue. As his voice fell, the atmosphere in the field suddenly changed and the gentleness and repression suddenly became sharp and harsh. At this moment, whether it is the double-sword pirates or the people of the small town, they can't help but stare at the duo in front of their eyes, revealing a look of incomparable attention and tension. Ghost Sword Yarrow invited Ghost Hand Ross into a partnership with him, which was enough to set off a huge wave of news in the West Blue, and the last semi-threatening remark also showed the arrogance and domineering attitude of Ghost Sword Yarrow, the pirate who survived the Grand Line. Partner with you, Ross looked calm and said with a slightly longer tone. Just as Ghost Sword Yarrow smiled and thought that Ross was going to accept his offer, the latter part of Ross's sentence came out lightly. Didn't you escape the Grand Line with your tail between your legs? Ghost Sword Yarrow's smile solidified on his face. His face gradually became depressed and cold, palpitating, and even if someone looked at him from far away, he would still feel a sharp chill on their body. For him, the failure to break through from the Marine fleet on the Grand Line and be forced to flee back to the West Blue to reconstitute his fleet anonymously was the greatest shame he had ever suffered and the most unacceptable thing he had ever done. Very good. You have great courage as expected of someone who killed a rear admiral of the Marine headquarters. You really are good and I wanted you to join me. Well, it was worth a shot, but unfortunately, you will be killed here. Slowly, he pulled out a red monstrous sword from his back. His eyes were cruel and fierce, and as he looked at Ross, a fierce and evil momentum surged up in them. In the face of the cruel and oppressive wicked momentum, Ross's expression is always the same as before. It seems that there was no emotion in his eyes and he was totally unaffected. If you can do it, then try it. Whiz! Almost at the moment when Ross's voice fell, Ghost Sword Yarrow shot out. His battle style was quite different from that of his predecessors. He was extremely decisive and ferocious. After failing to recruit Ross, he immediately decided to kill Ross in the West Blue, killing a disaster now to save future troubles in the Grand Line journey. Sneer. Before he reached Ross, his sword came out. Ghost Sword Yarrow is surprisingly fast, almost a quarter faster than Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo, which is a little bit beyond Ross's expectations, but only a little. Bang! Faced with a sudden rush to the front and the incredibly fast sword of Ghost Sword Yarrow, Ross had already launched the observation hockey earlier and he fully captured Yarrow's actions. He mobilized the power of distortion in advance and punched out. With the Ross's fist, the power of distortion slammed into Ghost Sword Yarrow blood-colored sword's energy. Ghost Sword Yarrow was evidently less powerful than Ross in terms of pure power and was directly pushed back. What? For Ross's to be able to react to his sudden attack and make a precise response, it is a bit beyond Ghost Sword Yarrow's expectations. Although he did not use his maximum speed, it looked like Ross also did not put much effort in his attack. After a punching Ghost Sword Yarrow back, Ross raised his foot and stepped lightly. The ground suddenly surged under his feet and the sand rushed toward Ghost Sword Yarrow. I have already seen through your attacks and it will have no effect on me. Ghost Sword Yarrow recovered from Ross's unexpected reaction speed. Faced with Ross's counterattack, he did not panic but hummed softly. He stepped on his feet and suddenly turned into a shadow, passing through the sand at a tremendous speed. Do you know why I am called Ghost Sword? Not because of sword arts, but because of my footwork and speed. No one can see through it. Ghost steps. She. Just as Ghost Sword Yarrow's voice fell, 3 blood sword energies were suddenly fired from 3 different directions towards Ross in the center. It was a sword energy attack that Ghost Sword Yarrow performed from 3 different directions in an instant with his speed. Oh, it's a good speed, but still, it's too slow. Faced with 3 sword energy attacks from 3 directions, Ross responded in a calm tone and with a few slight twists of his body, he almost magically passed through the gap between the 3 sword energies. 3 blood sword energy cuts on the 4 sides of the beach and the surrounding sand has a huge crack of about 20 or 30 meters. It's totally invisible. What kind of speed is that? The brief confrontation between Ross and Yarrow dazzled all the double sword pirates and the people of the small town. After Yarrow's ghost steps, which is similar to Soru, his figure has completely disappeared in most people's eyes. Even those who have some strength can hardly see a trace his shadow and they can't respond to it. Yaro's speed is astonishing and Ross's way of avoiding the attacks is also shocking. He wriggles his body in such a way that he avoided 3 sharp sword energy attacks from 3 different directions. This level of battle, they can't understand it anymore. I don't know which side will win, I can't guess. Many people show concern and nervousness. Ghost Hand and Ghost Sword, these two represent the peak pirate forces of the West Blue. No other pirate can compare with them and the outcome of this battle will undoubtedly determine the true power of the West Blue. This level of pirates, if they don't go to the Grand Line and stay in West Blue, they're completely capable of ruling this part of the sea. On the field, Ross faced Ghost Sword Yaro, who was flashing around him and judged that his opponent's speed was weaker than his. Instead of using Soru and chasing him, Ross calmly urged power of distortion. Doppelganger technique. Buzz. Ross's figure flickered for 2 moments and 4 identical Ross figures appeared in the field. From a distance, there was no real difference between them. The 4 figures, together with the real body, stood in 4 corners, facing towards the outside and greeted the ghostly figure that flashed. Phantom images. Troublesome tricks. Ghost Sword Yaro, who was walking around in a ghostly way, looked at the 4 identical figures in the field and frowned. He couldn't use observation hockey so he could only test them one by one. But when he tried to attack one, the 4 Ross's figure lifted their feet at the same time, and the raging dust and sand rose wildly, sweeping in all directions. Whiz. Whiz. In the dusty sand, Ghost Sword Yaro's vision was greatly affected and 4 Ross figures flashed back and forth in the dust, which made him a little disoriented. Not only does he have to judge whether Ross's figure is real or not, but he also has to avoid being entangled in the sand covered by a strange force and the speed advantage he has no longer exists. In the dusty sand, the afterimages are constantly flickering and from time to time, there comes a sound of a sword. Occasionally, sword energy cuts through the diffuse dust and falls on the coastline, cutting a deep crack in the beach. Abominable. Ghost Sword Yaro swung his sword and passed through a phantom doppelganger of Ross. After sensing the disturbance behind him, he couldn't help but curse and chop back with his sword reflexively. During the collision between the two, the distortion force clashed with the blood-red sword, his sword whined sadly and even his arms were sour and numb. Whiz. Ghost Sword Yaro barely blocked Ross's punch. Without hesitation, he retreated more than 10 meters away from Ross and swapped his sword to his left hand before shaking his right hand forcefully several times, which alleviated the feeling of sour numbness. He couldn't use hockey and his endurance for the power of distortions is much weaker than Onigumo's. If Ross hadn't dispersed some of the power of distortion to control sand in his phantom images, this punch would have destroyed his arm. I can't fight this guy in close combat. Ross's strength was somewhat out of his expectation. He and Ross fought 3 or 4 times in front of each other. Each time he was attacked by that weird force. If he hadn't been blitzing every time, he would have withdrawn decisively when he was exhausted. I'm afraid my arm is half useless at the moment. Sigh. Ghost Sword Yaro dared not confront Ross head-on. He began to use sword energy and launch long-range attacks against Ross, but because of the dust and the phantom doppelganger, he could not carry out his attack at all. Most of his attacks were made up by sand on the shore. Ghost Sword Yaro realized that this type of attacks are useless against Ross and he is wasting his stamina. He finally stopped attacking Ross. He dropped a little and held the hilt of his sword with both of his hands. His figure suddenly flashed on the battlefield. Ghost Step, Flash Shadow. Chi. 2 huge bloody sword energy, one from left and one from right cut the battlefield, sweeping the dusty sand in Ross's doppelganger and his real body with it. Are you giving up on your fancy tricks? Faced with this attack, Ross calmly opened his mouth and retracted his doppelganger, and withdrew the power of distortion from the sand, while focusing the power of distortion on his hands, facing one of the sword energy attacks. Z. Although the bloody sword energy is powerful, it is still stiffly suppressed under Ross's all-out power of distortion and the sword energy was held between his hands. Ross threw back the sword energy. Observation hockey accurately captured the root of Ghost Sword Yaro attacks, which was a pre-judgment attack. The sword energy attack was thrown back by Ross as it flew towards Ghost Sword Yaro. Do you want to use my own attacks against me? It's really as bad behavior. Ghost Sword Yaro looked at the bloody sword energy that came towards him and snorted. The sword energy in his hand was smashed into the air with a violent wave. Ross ignored Ghost Sword Yarrow and suddenly bent over and laid his hands on the beach. Bang bang. Power of distortion operated by both hands is much more flexible and fierce than foot control. In almost an instant, the beach with Ross as the center and tens of meters in radius stirred up crazily. When it comes to large-scale attacks, Ghost Sword Yarrow is not the only one who can use them, but the current environment is just right for him to release a certain trick. Flowing sand, waterfall stream. Ross took a deep breath and the power of distortion erupted. Not good. Ghost Sword Yarrow had noticed that the situation was not right in the vicinity as early as when the sand was surging and his vigilance increased sharply. He planned to pull back and stay away from Ross to avoid the upcoming attack. But things were much worse than he thought. Because the sand was mobile, Ross manipulated only a part of the sand, causing all the sand on the beach to roll up and a wave similar to a tsunami rushed toward him. And the general direction of the attack is surging from the shore towards the sea, that is to say, that there is no retreat at all, unless he hides in the sea. Ghost Sword Yarrow's face changed as he watched the tsunami-like sand attack coming towards him. Not far away. Everyone who was looking at the battlefield on the shore saw this scene and they felt that their mouths were dry and they were shocked. Fake, it's fake. Is this the power of the strongest pirate in the West Blue, the power of Ghost Hand Ross? Such power is already an unacceptable level for them. In their opinion, this type of power is not something that a human being should possess. Ross stood behind the raging sand waves and calmly launched observation hockey, feeling the situation behind the sand waves. The battlefield, under his control from the beginning, had changed from the shore where the ship was. Now behind the waves was the open sea and there was no place for Ghost Sword Yarrow to escape. His speed is faster and his footwork is also flexible. But there is nothing but sea behind him and all the possible escape routes are blocked and there is no room to dodge. If the opponent retreats into the sea, the advantage of the speed can be brought into play. Ross will be able to hammer a squirrel in the sea with the advantage of Geppo, moonwalk, not to mention a much larger target. It's over. Ross's mind flashed with every single possibility and he calmly whispers. Behind the waves. Although Ghost Sword Yarrow is not a devil fruit user, he also knows that once he retreats into the water, he is giving up his speed advantage. It is likely that he will never have a chance to come back ashore, so he can only take a deep breath and swing his sword in the face of the coming waves. One blade flow, decapitation dance. He held his sword in both of his hands and unleashed a series of attacks. The sand waves that hit him were constantly broken. Because of the wide coverage of the sand waves, the power of distortions was dispersed. The sand waves split open and the raging sand waves could hardly bind his body. While constantly breaking the sand waves, Ghost Sword Yarrow rushed towards Ross's position and indifferently said, "Your attack range is large enough, but the power behind it is too weak. This type of attack must put a big strain on you. If you want to spend more of your stamina, then try it. Consuming stamina, your thinking is too simple. Not yet." Standing behind the sand waves, controlling the sand waves to kill Ghost Sword Yarrow from all directions, Ross heard his words clearly. As the voice fell, Ross's power of distortions condensed together again. He used his 5 fingers to force the power of distortion and slammed it down. Crash. Under Ross's all-out manipulation, the sand in front of him began to roll and surge, rising gradually like a real wave, turning into a terrifying sand wave off the height of more than 20 meters. Ghost Sword Yarrow on the shore looked at the scene in front of him and his face finally showed a hint of horror and fear. He didn't expect Ross to be able to create such a powerful attack even when he was manipulating a large area of sand. Damn it. He gritted his teeth, held the sword hilt in both of his hands and looked fiercely at the coming waves. Marine Vice Admiral's fleet can't kill me, a newcomer to West Blue. One sword, Ghost Shadow Decapitation. A reddish sword energy bursts out from above his sword blade. He inserted his blade into the sand wave and tore the sand wave open from the bottom to up, revealing a small town and Ross behind the sand wave. But before Ghost Sword Yarrow has the time to be happy, the slashed area of the wave collapsed and fell head on him, closing a gap between them in an instant. No. Ghost Sword Yarrow was completely covered by the gushing sandstorm. The heavy sand waves fell heavily and most of them plunged into the sea. A huge spray of water was set off on the sea that tumbled backward. After that huge piece of sediment has fallen, it was faintly visible that some of the small shrimps and crabs were struggling and there was still a region of sand that was violently twitching as if something was trying to drill out. Ross looked calmly at the squirming area, He pressed his hands together as the power of distortion surged from his body and whistled into the earth. Sandstorm, great burial. Boom. Everything that was originally crushed by the huge waves of sand, again started to madly twist and squeezed under the influence of the distortion force and collapsed toward the bottom, and the beach area of a few tens of meters roared and directly collapsed. At last, all the sounds disappeared. The remnants of shrimps and crabs burst open one after another, and a deadly silence fell on the entire beach. At the same time, Ross heard a familiar system sound in his ear. He straightened up and gave up on the idea of checking again for any life sign with his observation hockey. Ghost Sword Yarrow with a bounty of 98 million berries has been killed. Rewards gained are 35 talent proficiency points and 1 free talent point. 1 point free talent point? Ross's calm eyes finally flashed a slight fluctuation and he smiled. 35 talent proficiency points are not much, but 1 free talent point is a greater reward for him. Counting the rewards of killing the double sword Derlot before, these two pirates have actually provided him with 2 free talent points. This trip is undoubtedly extremely satisfying for Ross. It looks like Captain won. Robin stood far behind the crowd, looking in the direction of the beach, with a slight smile. Seeing the result of the battle, even though she knew Ross well, she was still surprised by the one-sided victory. Ross did not have such strength when she first joined, but in just over half a year, Ross's strength rose rapidly. From the first time she saw a battleship flee, till now where he can destroy several battleships. Branch Rear Admiral, Headquarters Rear Admiral, Grand Line Pirate, every opponent was unconsciously defeated by Ross. Looking at the distant coast, Robin could not help but think that the Marine generals who forced Ross to become a pirate should have some regret at this time. Is it over? There's no movement. The people of the town looked at the shore from afar, and after a moment they came back from their shock, but when they overcome their shock, their hearts became more agitated again. There is no movement, that is to say, Ghost Sword was killed. Returning from Grand Line with a bounty as high as 98 million berries, that big pirate failed to compete with the meteor-like rise of Ghost Hand Ross of the West Blue. It shouldn't be that this is the rise of another Red Hair Shanks level character. Some people shudder at the thought of regularly publishing newspapers, defined by the government as one of the world's most dangerous pirate. The captain of the fearful red-haired pirate with a bounty so high that they can't help but shudder. Little is known about the Grand Line in West Blue, but the existence of Red Hair Shanks, White Bear Edward Newgate, is well known. No, someone came back from his shock and shook his head when he heard the words of the people next to him. It's not that easy. Do you know what kind of pirate Shanks is? There are many pirates in this sea, but there are only 4 people standing on top of everyone. He is one of them. West Blue has produced Red Hair Shanks, which some people feel ashamed, while others are proud of it, just like East Blue's birth of the pirate King Roger, which will not be forgotten. But, the man nodded, took a deep breath and said, but here in West Blue, no one can challenge his position anymore. He is the strongest pirate of this generation of the West Blue. While the people of the town were arguing, Ross, who killed Ghost Sword Yarrow, came towards the 3 double sword pirates' ships docked on the shore. Ross never feared anyone's revenge, but he did everything in his power to avoid future troubles. That guy is coming. Pull up the anchor. The pirates on the 3 ships of double sword pirates were still shocked seeing their captain being killed by Ross. When they saw that Ross was walking towards them, their faces changed dramatically, showing fear. Some people took firearms, some filled the cannon's shells, and some people tried to escape from the ships. The scene was extremely chaotic. Boom. Boom. 3 pirate ships were destroyed one after another after several guns and cannons sounds rippled off the shore. The double sword pirates had a lot of pirates with a total bounty of 20 million. Although the proficiency acquired by killing them was very small, as he only gained 5 talent proficiency points, which is better than nothing. After the destruction of the double sword pirates, he got a total of 110 talent proficiency points and 2 free talent points, which is a bumper harvest. Whiz. After destroying the last ship together with a large number of pirates, Ross jumped back to shore and did not rush to use up his talents and proficiency points, but stepped lightly and disappeared from the public sight after a few flashes. Behind the crowd, Ross appeared next to Robin and asked her, "Did you find any trace of him?" "No," Robin shook her head. The only mission given to her by Ross was to find Demon Sheriff Lafitte in the chaos. The Demon Sheriff, however, doesn't seem to have come over, or he is very skillful in hiding himself from her search using flower fruit. Hannah no mi. Hmm. Ross touched his chin and thought a little. Suddenly, his eyes flashed and he turned to look down into a dark street not far away. How, I was found. A suppressed laugh came from the depths of the street. Whiz. Almost immediately after the sound came out, Ross stepped down and rushed straight into the dark street. When Ross rushed in, a figure hiding deep in the street jumped up and turned over the roof. Ross jumped up and chased him. After several tosses and turns, Ross eventually caught up with the figure by using his observation hockey. It was a white-skinned man with a tall ceremonial hat on his head and a crutch in his hand. He was the navigator and the Fifth Fleet captain of the Blackbeard Pirates, Demon Sheriff Lafitte. Compared with the character in the original series, he has not changed much and he doesn't even look too young, but his hiding methods and tricks are dazzling. If Ross had not locked him firmly with his observation hockey, he would not have been able to find any trace of him after several moves. I don't have any ill intents and I don't see anything I shouldn't have seen. Seeing that he couldn't escape from Ross, Lafitte decisively gave up on fleeing. He stood on the roof of a house and looked at Ross, showing a very helpless expression and gently spread the cane in his hands. Ross calmly looked at him and said, "You don't look like a law-abiding person, so, are you interested in joining me in making the world turn upside down?" Lafitte was slightly surprised and various thoughts flashed through his eyes. Then he put one hand on his chest and made a gentleman's bow. He smiled and said, "I will be honored to join the Ghost Hand Pirates, Captain." He has been constantly learning about the world and the situation of the West Blue and he has even gotten a lot of details about pirates. The Ghost Hand Pirates has gotten famous recently and now they are on the top of West Blue. As a restless person, he naturally did not plan to live in peace and security. He always wanted to find a chance to join someone strong and roam around in this world. Although he didn't plan to join someone so early, Ross went out of his way to invite him. Rejection may not be a good thing. Smart people will always make the smartest choices. Ross slightly smiled. Ross. Lafitte, I am good at hiding and sailing. Lafitte put his hand on the corner of his hat, with his head slightly beneath his side and his fingers gently lifted the corner. He looked like an orthodox gentleman, totally out of line with the name Demon Sheriff. It was easier than Ross imagined to recruit Lafitte. Lafitte has nothing to pack up or he seems to hide everything in his body, but Ross doesn't know where he hides it. The trip to Goldwater Sea ended with Lafitte's joining their crew. Ross crossed 2 streets with his new navigator and found Robin. Nico Robin, responsible for intelligence. Ross introduced Robin and nodded to Robin. Lafitte, our new navigator. Both of them are highly intelligent and in some ways, Lafitte is better than Nico Robin. After all, Robin puts her wisdom on her subjects of learning. Speaking of it, Marines has been watching you in the dark. After a brief greeting, Lafitte rotated the red cane in his hand and smiled at Ross. Ross shook his head said, "There are naturally Marines on this island because of the 2 strongest pirates, don't bother. Before entering the Grand Line, I don't think Marines will come to find any trouble with us." That's true. Lafitte put down his cane. He intended to say that if he did not mind then he could pull Marines' eyes out and torture them and even send some false intelligence to the Marines, but it didn't look like he needs to mention it. If there is nothing else, you can go to the ship and consider the next stage, the Grand Line. Grand Line, that's a very challenging place, huh. Lafitte smiled and his laughter and expressions were filled with a strange style. Then, you will be responsible for the next drawing of sea maps and the choice of sea route. When the ship arrives, I will give you the sea maps and compass. Ross said as he walked away, while Lafitte and Robin followed him from left and right. Walking on the street, all the way unimpeded, even if someone noticed Ross, they were all shocked and they hid on both sides of the street, carefully watching Ross walk away. Quickly, Ross returned to his ship with Lafitte and Robin and did not encounter any trouble on the way. Marines did not dare to do anything to him. More than 10 miles away from the island, on a battleship which is preparing for the attack on the island, a Marine Branch Rear Admiral asked his subordinate on Den Den Mushi with a serious and nervous look.
"How is it? What is the result?" The Double Swords pirates were completely annihilated. Nothing was left. Ghost Hand Ross won the fight without any losses on his side and another weird man followed them to their ship. When he heard that Ross had won a great victory without being hurt in both battle, Rear Admiral knew that there was nothing that he could do, and when he heard that a strange man accompanied them to Ross's ship, he could not help asking. "Weird man, did you took a photo? It has been taken? Okay. Submit the photo quickly. They have failed to arrest the Ghost Hand Pirates and the Double Sword Pirates.
They have to at least submit some new information, otherwise, they will get in trouble with the headquarters. After he hangs up on the Den Den Mushi, a captain whispered to him, "Rear Admiral, shall we continue to chase the ghost hand pirates?" The Rear Admiral looked annoyed at Captain Word's next to him. As a Rear Admiral, he looked at the pirate but didn't dare to go. It was a very shameful thing for him, and then this guy had to ask a clear question. "We are temporarily on standby for further orders." A few days later, Ross is sailing through the Goldwater Sea. The news of the defeat of Double Sword Pirates was published by various newspaper news agencies, with various newspaper broadcasts spread throughout West Blue. On a route to the Grand Line, the Ghost Shadow ship was sailing at full speed and Ross was standing on the deck of the Ghost Shadow ship with a newspaper thrown by a newsbird. Shocking. West Blue's hegemony is in twists and turns, changing ownership again. After reading half of the newspaper, Ross threw the newspaper into the sea and said helplessly, "What these messy news agencies have published is no more reliable than what the government has published." Robin covers her mouth and laughs lightly. "It's impossible for them to publish accurate news honestly, but Captain, you've become the focus of news agencies in West Blue." Ross shook his head and asked Lafitte, who was observing the direction and course of the wind at the top of the mast. "What's the direction and speed of the wind? How long will it take us to reach Barrows Town?" Barrows Town, it is the closest island to Grand Line in West Blue, similar to East Blue's Logue Town, which is considered as the last island before the Grand Line. "Without any surprises and with the speed of the ship, it will take us 1 month to reach the Barrows Town, Captain." Lafitte leapt and floated down from the mast like a piece of paper. Ross nodded and said, "The problems of navigations are up to you." Lafitte is responsible for navigation, and even if he is limited to a navigator, it saves Ross a lot of time. Captain may rest assured. Lafitte slightly bowed and smiled as Ross returned to his cabin. Before embarking on the ship, his knowledge of Ross was limited to all kinds of intelligence and news. In the past few days, he had a more detailed understanding of all aspects of Ross, and he more and more confirmed that Ross is a valuable captain to follow. Turning the world upside down, I'm looking forward to it, haha. Walking into the cabin, Ross went all the way to the exercise room. After closing the door, he willed, and before his eyes appeared a translucent talent system panel that only he could see, where 3 talents trees stood quietly. Living talent tree is unchanged for a long time, and there is still only 1 navigation talent on it. Now, with his new navigator, Ross would like to take back the 1 talent point he spent to learn navigation, but apparently, the system will not let him easily take the points away. The battle talent tree is also refreshing after it has been activated. Firearms shooting. 50 close combat fighting. 100. Distortion fruit. 215 Soru of Marines Rokushiki. 0. Kami-e, paper drawing, by Marines Rokushiki. 0 Marines Rokushiki's Geppo, Moonwalk. 0. Observation hockey. 0 Observation hockey shows a golden activated state, meaning that Ross can indeed save 1 free talent point by self-practicing. As for talent proficiency, it brings an extra bonus, but self-exercise does not increase talent proficiency. The general talent tree has also changed a lot from the previous one. Agility enhancement. 100, high-level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 200, top-level strengthening. After killing the Double Sword Pirates, Ross gained 2 free talent points and 110 talent proficiency points, which allowed him a lot of choices. Observation hockey's strength is enough for now. If I encounter an enemy whose speed is faster than what I can see, hear and feel, even if I could perceive his actions, I wouldn't be able to respond to them physically. Ross thought a little and ruled out the 2 options, observation hockey and agility enhancement. His speed and strength are in balance, and the improvement in speed and observation hockey will have very little effect on his overall strength. As for physical enhancement, after such a long period of exercise, his physical fitness is much better than when he just arrived at the top-level physical enhancement. Even if the strength of distortion fruit is enhanced further, his physical fitness is enough to bear its burden, so he is not in any hurry to fill in that particular proficiency. The last remaining option is distortion fruit. If all 110 proficiency points are put in it, then the basic conditions for activating the branch of gravity distortion will be reached in an instant. If I put 85 proficiency points on distortion fruit, only 25 proficiency points can be used to improve my physical fitness. I don't know if such a disparity of advancement can afford a huge increase in the power of distortion. Ross thought it would be nice to have a few dozen more talent proficiency points, but there may have been new choices at that time. Talent proficiency points and free talent points were always scarce resources. In addition to proficiency points, 2 free talent points also brings several options. Armament Hockey can undoubtedly be activated, Haoshoku Hockey can also be activated, and even Strength Enhancement in the General Department, etc., are all within the options. Due to the scarcity of free talent points, the best solution is naturally based on the practicing Armament Hockey to activate it, but currently, Ross does not have any practice method of Armament Hockey, and without any clue, he cannot practice Armament Hockey. He can also hope that he will be able to awaken Armament Hockey in battle. Hockey's practice methods are difficult to obtain in the first half of the Grand Line. They can only be obtained in the second half of the Grand Line, New World. Without Armament Hockey, the situation would be very dangerous when encountering someone with a Logia Devil Fruit abilities. Ross thought it over for a long time. Armament Hockey. Ross watched the trunk of the Talents tree representing Armament Hockey and took a deep breath before choosing to consume 1 free talent point to activate Armament Hockey. Buzz. The remaining free talent points changed from 2 to 1, and the Armament Hockey's green branch flashed with a golden light and turned into a golden color.
At the same time, a lot of knowledge about Armament Hockey was sent to Ross's mind. He closed his eyes as his body kept shaking. Within a few seconds, he consciousness experienced 3-month Armament Hockey training.
A slight heat flow gushes out of his heart and runs through his entire body, bringing a slight increase in Ross's physical fitness, while a will hiding in his body, which has never been stimulated, was released, and a very weak Armament Hockey enhances one part of his body. When Ross opened his eyes, his senses have changed a lot. In addition to feeling the power of distortion fruit in his body, he can now feel another kind of power contained in his body which is quite different from his devil fruit power. Busashoku, Armament Hockey. It is slightly similar to Observation Hockey in origin, but major parts of it are completely different. As Ross wills, an invisible breath comes out of him and surrounds him on outside. The skills activated by the talent system have always been complete without any default, and the Armament Hockey around Ross's body is flexible and free from any sense of stagnation. This is Armament Hockey. Ross manipulated the aura around his body, muttered a sentence, and then his eyes twinkled slightly. He concentrated his thoughts on his arms and controlled the convergence of the Armament Hockey. Buzz. The gathering of Armament Hockey formed a strong aura around Ross's arm and squeezed and condensed under Ross's control, but when it was about to form a black hardening, it suddenly broke apart and the aura dispersed. Ross tried twice in a row and failed to harden Armament Hockey. As for the cause of his failure, he found it all at once. Insufficient strength. Perceiving Armament Hockey around him, Ross shook his head. First, his Armament Hockey is too weak. Second, his physical strength is not strong enough. Although his physical strength is more abnormal than any ordinary person, it is still a little far from the Armament Hockey hardening. Being able to mobilize Armament Hockey is just a startup skill. By practicing enough to form Armament Hockey hardening, then one has thoroughly mastered this kind of hockey. Thinking about it, Ross still gave up the idea of putting proficiency points in Armament Hockey. There is still a month to go before he officially enters Grand Line. After Armament Hockey is activated, there is no need for practice. Even if it does not meet the hardening criteria in 1 month, some improvements can be made. As long as he has a certain level in Armament Hockey, even if hardening is not achieved, he will be able to do something against a Logia Devil Fruit user. For him, Distortion Fruit is still his main development direction. Armament Hockey can mainly be used against the bug-like ability of elementalization. After all, it is unrealistic to try to raise all of his abilities to the top at the same time. Ross intends to reserve the remaining 1 free talent point until the proficiency of the Distortion Fruit reaches 300 proficiency points, after which he can activate the Gravity Distortion ability, which may require 1 free talent point. There is still 110 talent proficiency points. Ross looked at the branch of Distortion Fruit. He didn't add it up just a little. He directly put 45 talent proficiency points in it. In a flash of light, Distortion Fruit's proficiency turned to 260. Meanwhile, Ross suddenly felt a burning sensation in his body. The power of distortions rose rapidly in that burning heat. In a few seconds, the power of distortions had risen dramatically. Ross closed his eyes and quietly felt the heat and the power of distortion in his body. When the heat subsided, he opened his eyes and clenched his fist. Previously, the range of his Distortion Fruit power was a radius of about 30 meters with him as the center, and after putting 45 proficiency points in it, the range of his Distortion Fruit power has increased to 50 meters. Ross can clearly feel that his power can not only easily cover an entire ship, but also extend outward, even to the bottom of the sea. Whitebeard's tremor fruit, Gura Gura no Mi, can trigger sea shock, and the distortion fruit can naturally do similar things, but distortion fruit has a smaller range than tremor fruit, Gura Gura no Mi. My body can still bear this level of power. After perceiving the changes in his body, Ross muttered. Power of distortion has skyrocketed and the burden placed on his body has naturally increased a lot, but since Ross's physical fitness has always been ahead of his devil fruit, so after this surge, his physical strength and the power of distortion fruit can be improved and can reach a balance. After a little hesitation, Ross put 20 talent proficiency points to physical enhancement and then assigns another 30 talent proficiency points to distortion fruit. Buzz. After the talent proficiency assignment, Ross's body changed slightly again and the range of distortion fruit reached nearly 70 meters. Sure enough, with the increase of proficiency the power of distortion fruit will increase more and more, but the increment in physical enhancement is getting smaller and smaller. Ross felt the changes in the body and his eyes flickered. Such a divergence also means that in addition to allocating a large number of talent proficiency points to physical enhancement, he also needs to further exercise his body to adapt to the continuous strengthening of his devil fruit power. He originally intended to put the remaining points in the distortion fruit for its proficiency to reach 300, but Ross eventually assigned the remaining 15 proficiency points to physical enhancement. To activate gravity distortion he needs to spend more than 1 free talent points. Even if the proficiency of the power of distortion reached 300, the gravity distortion will not be activated in a short time. So this is not as good as balancing his physical fitness and his devil fruit strength, which is also beneficial to practice armament hockey. After assigning 110 talent proficiency points, Ross's talent panel changed again. Firearms shooting. 50 close combat fighting, 100. Distortion fruit. 290 Soru of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Kami-e, paper drawing, of Marines Rokushiki, 0. Marines Rokushiki's Geppo, moonwalk, 0. Observation hockey. 0. Armament hockey. 0. Distortion fruit is only 10 proficiency points away from the second branch which will activate the gravity distortion, while Marines Rokushiki is all 0. Maybe after the physical enhancement and the agility enhancement's proficiency reach the upper limit of 500, he will allocate some proficiency points to Soru and Geppo, moonwalk. Agility enhancement. 100, high-level strengthening. Physical enhancement. 235, top-level strengthening. The general talent department has not changed much. The power of distortion fruit has more than doubled and his original body is little weaker than his devil fruit ability. Ross shook his head helplessly. Even though he finally replenished the physical enhancement by 15 proficiency points, his body still couldn't keep up with the increase in the power of distortion. Naturally, it also has the advantage that when Ross breaks out with all of his strength, the power of distortion will reach a terrifying level and Marine Rear Admiral Onigumo, who once suppressed him by virtue of his strength, will not be able to resist his current power of distortion. I don't know how strong I am currently. How much worse am I compared to a Vice Admiral of the Headquarters? Ross thought for a moment. Headquarters Vice Admiral and Headquarters Rear Admiral are also quite different. It is quite difficult for a Headquarters Rear Admiral to be directly promoted to a Headquarters Vice Admiral. Most of the Headquarters Rear Admiral need to be placed outside the branch base to serve as a branch Vice Admiral for a period of time, and only after gaining some military merits, they can return to the Headquarters. Regardless of his own affordability, he should be able to compete with a weak Headquarters Vice Admiral, and he is not an opponent to most of the top Headquarters Vice Admiral. After thinking about the strength of Onigumo, Ross roughly judged what level he is now. Before entering the Grand Line, it is rare for someone to have abilities that surpass Headquarters Rear Admiral and can deal with a Vice Admiral in general. Next step is to continue to exercise my physical body and armament hockey. Ross regained his thoughts and quickly set a short-term practicing route for himself. Since his devil fruit abilities are too strong, which brings a certain level of burden on his body, he will focus on his physical training for some time. And it will be beneficial for his armament hockey training as it also requires a strong physical body. I still have to use the biggest weight and then double the number of push-ups and squats, one set for 1,000, one set at a time. After simply setting up the practice plan, Ross came to a lot of weights, picked out the heaviest one and started to exercise after wearing it. Half a month passed quickly. Because Lafitte was responsible for navigation, Ross had more free time. he spent a large part of it on his training and some part of it on rest and relaxation. Robin's devil fruit ability is also useful for massage and the effects are very good. Although this is a strange trend for Robin, Ross did not intend to make her a battle-oriented member. If such a good girl exercises and put muscles all over her body, it will not be a beautiful picture to imagine and he will surely suffer from headaches. Ghost Shadow ship is not far away. On the windy and sunny sea, a pirate ship is slowly sailing. There is no wicked and fierce atmosphere that is found on any usual pirate ship, but the atmosphere is relaxing. It seems that the people on board don't care whether they will encounter merchant ships or not, much less whether they will encounter marines. All of them are enjoying themselves, drinking and eating meat. Naturally, if a marine's battleship were here, they would have turned around and run when they saw the pirate ship, because the pirate flag hung on the sail of the ship was enough to frighten the whole ocean. How does it feel to be back home? Beckman took a cigarette and came to the red-hair Shanks standing at the front of the deck. Shanks stood there relaxed in his cloak and slippers, looking at the vast sea ahead, smiling and saying, "Not bad." Nearly 20 years, looking at the sea, Shanks muttered that it had been nearly 20 years since he got on Roger's ship as a trainee. 13 years ago Roger became the Pirate King and 11 years ago Roger started the Great Age of Pirates. Of all Roger's crew, only he got Captain Straw Hat and he did not disappoint Roger's former crew members. After Roger started the Great Age of Pirates, it only took him 11 years to become one of the 4 emperors galloping on the Grand Line in New World. Naturally, it only took Roger a few years to conquer the Grand Line and became the king standing at the top of countless pirates. First let's go back to my hometown, then we go to the East Blue. Shanks gently touched the straw hat on his head. Beckman laughed and said, "Hey," suddenly coming to the West Blue without saying a word and then going to East Blue again. "Marine and the government are afraid that we would make a mess. Let them go around." Shanks slightly smiled. If the government and Marines want to deal with them, they must send at least 3 top-level battle forces. Otherwise, they will not be able to do anything. The government will not provoke a world-class war randomly. Beckman has considered all these things before taking any action. Just as Shank was enjoying the sea breeze, the ship's sentry post suddenly shouted at him. "Boss! There is a pirate ship over there, Ghost Shadow ship." Lafitte is standing on the sentry post at the top of the mast, one of his hand holding the wooden guardrail and his other hand holding a telescope, looking in the distance. Long ago, he found a dark shadow on the far sea, which could be judged as a ship, but he was uncertain as to what it was. As the 2 ships approached, the shadow gradually became clear. That flag is, when he saw the flag on the ship, Lafitte's expression suddenly changed slightly and those expressions looked strange on him as he always looked like a gentleman who rarely shows any emotions. Whiz! After judging it for a second, he jumped from the mast and landed on the deck below. He said to Robin, "Call Captain up, that ship belongs to Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates." Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates. Robin was shocked. She thought it would be a merchant ship or ordinary pirate ship, but she didn't expect that it would be Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates, which are a terrifying force on the Grand Line. Quickly, Robin found Ross in the exercise room, and when Ross heard about the Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates, he came to the deck with a serious expression. Taking the telescope from Lafitte's hand and looking carefully at the ship coming in from the distance, he said thoughtfully, "It is indeed Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates." Calculating the time, it is now the August of the 11th year of the Great Age of Pirates. According to the original plot, Shanks arrived at the East Blue's Fuchsia village around this time and stayed there for about a year. "Captain, should we avoid them?" Lafitte proposed from the side. Although he is very optimistic about Ross and boarded Ross's ship, he is not an idiot. At this time point, it is undoubtedly a suicide attempt to act against Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates, a world-renowned existence. Ross put down his telescope and looked in the direction of the Akagami, Red Hair, pirate ship. He calmly said, "Don't panic. Change our route slightly so that we won't collapse against them head-on and we will pass by them." This is also very dangerous. Lafitte is slightly worried. Ross stood on the bow of the ship and he doesn't intend to circumvent his ship around in a big circle to avoid Shanks. If he encounters the Beast Pirates or BIGMOM Pirates, he might avoid them temporarily, but he doesn't need to do that for Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates. In other words, Yonko, 4 Emperors, is also his target, but that is the ultimate goal. It is indeed too early to meet Akagami, Red Hair, Pirates at this time. Ross looked at the gradually approaching Akagami, Red Hair, pirate ship, whispering in his heart. Looking at the fast-approaching Akagami, red hair, pirate ship, Robin can't help but show a little nervousness. Few people can make her nervous, but a Marine Admiral Aokiji has made her deeply afraid of him, and Akagami, red hair, pirates is the existence that even a Marine Admiral dares not dare to provoke. As the distance between the two ships gradually narrowed, the course of the two ships became very clear. It was not the opposite, but two parallel lines that did not intersect. They would pass each other at a distance of about 30 or 40 meters away. Robin and Lafitte were nervous, but Ross remained calm as if the ship in front of him is only an ordinary merchant ship. 100 meters, 90 meters, as the distances of ships further narrowed, the people on the ships on both sides became clearer and clearer. Ross had clearly seen the figures standing on the bow of the Akagami, red hair, pirates. One of them is wearing a black cloak and a yellow straw hat. He is one of the New World Yonko, 4 emperors, red hair Shanks. 40 meters, 30 meters, when the distance between the two ships reached 30 meters, the shortening was stopped. At this distance, Ross and the Shanks standing on the bow of the ship were almost opposite to each other, and they could almost see the expression on the other's face. This distance was not fixed but increased over time and became 40 or 50 meters until the two boats completely passed each other and nothing happened. When Akagami, red hair, pirate ship's hull was thoroughly brushed parallel to Ghost Shadow ship, Lafitte and Robin almost both took a long breath and looked at each other, and they found that both of their foreheads was covered with fine sweat stains. Only Ross remained calm, and his face did not betray any of his emotions. "It's all right. Keep going, our goal is Burroughs Town." Ross turned around and spoke in a light voice, and at the same time, he entered his cabin and disappeared. On the other side, on the Akagami, red hair, pirate's ship, there are still a large number of pirates who are drinking and eating meat, and most of them don't even know about the passing Ghost Shadow ship. Even if they knew, they wouldn't care much and continue to talk and laugh while eating and drinking. Standing at the bow of the ship, opposite to Ross, red hair Shanks returned to his mind with a slightly different look in his eyes when the hull of the Ghost Shadow ship has completely passed by him. "That man just now, what's wrong?" Beckman turned to Shanks and asked, "Do you want to stop them?" "No," Shanks shook his head and said with a slight twinkle in his eyes, "That man's eyes just gave me a very unusual feeling. I have a feeling that we will meet again." "Really?" Beckman took a puff of his cigarette and smiled. Nobody knows for sure about this kind of thing, but he didn't expect to meet someone who made Shanks has a premonition in West Blue. Just now that guy should be Ghost Hand Ross of West Blue. I read it in the newspaper before, and I think they're going to the Grand Line for us to see them again, but it's not that easy. This is just a chance encounter. For any pirate to see them, they have to first conquer the first half of the Grand Line, and this single step has taken countless lives. This premonition of Shanks may be just a hunch. After passing the Akagami, red hair, pirate's ship, the Ghost Shadow ship returned to its calm state again. Lafitte continued to control the course. Robin continued to read her books, occasionally directed the handyman to do some cleaning work on the ship, or assisted Lafitte in collecting and sailing, while Ross returned to the practice room and continued to exercise, practicing armament hockey. Armed, standing in front of a hard steel wall, Ross stretched out his fist and muttered while controlling his own armament hockey to gather on his fist. Compared with armament hockey, which has been enhanced a lot more in half a month's time, the constant concentration and cohesion gradually changed from surroundings to attachments. It became more and more strong, but it still could not form the black hardening. Not enough. Ross shook his head and punched the iron wall. Bang! Even if the armament hockey has not reached the degree of hardening, he only surrounded his fist in his will without the hardening, and he did not use his devil fruit powers, but he still left a fist shape on the solid iron wall. Very well, if it goes up at this rate, in half a month I should be able to gradually touch the armament hockey hardening level. Half a month later, when Ross finally reached the edge of armament hockey's hardening for the first time, Ghost Shadow ship arrived at Burroughs Town, the last island of West Blue before the Grand Line, and it is similar to Logue Town of East Blue. Although there are often pirates landing here, the arrival of Ghost Shadow ship at the port still caused a tremor on the dock. As the strongest pirate force of West Blue, the name of the Ghost Hand Pirates is very well known, and they are already very famous. First, let's collect enough fresh water and food for our future journey. When the ship was docked, Ross stood on the deck and looked at Lafitte and Robin and said, "You also need to buy a log pose, which is a must-have item for the Grand Line." "Understood, Captain." Lafitte shook the red stick in his hand, laughed and walked down the ramp. As a navigator, leave the matter of log pose to me. No matter how talented Lafitte was in the original series as one of the 10 captains of Blackbeard pirates, here he's a West Blue native who hasn't stepped into Grand Line. He is not very familiar with things like log pose, but with Ross with him, he will not step into the Grand Line without preparation. Go ahead. Ross nodded and handed the mission of acquiring a log pose to Lafitte. Robin slightly smiled while heading for the ramp and said, I'm going to buy fresh water and food. His 2 crew members took over the missions and Ross found that he didn't seem to have anything to do. He didn't have any interest in going ashore, so he sat down on the Ghost Shadow ship and waited for them to finish their mission and return. Meanwhile, news of the arrival of the Ghost Hand pirates in Barrows Town also spread rapidly to the Marine branch stationed in Barrows Town. Boom! Marine Captain Yukimura, the highest chief of the division, slapped his hand on the table and stood up violently, saying, Ghost Hand pirates are here? Yes, their ship was spotted at the port. Standing in front of Yukimura, Marine Lieutenant Commander's forehead was overflowing with cold sweat as he asked nervously, Captain, what should we do? Should we surround them? Yukimura also had a serious and tense look. Shaking his head in a dignified manner, he said, No, I will report to headquarters first. As a branch captain stationed in Barrows Town, his strength is not comparable to that of West Blue Captain and he will not be promoted to the Rear Admiral rank next, but he will be transferred to Marine Headquarters as a Headquarters Captain. Nevertheless, Ross sank an entire West Blue fleet led by Headquarters Rear Admiral Onigumo. Once any conflict occurred between him and Ross, he was not sure if he would walk away alive. Quickly, intelligence passed back from Yukimura's office to Marine Headquarters office in charge of West Blue. A Marine Headquarters Rear Admiral worked in this office. Onigumo was the most outstanding member of this office. Nobody expected him to fall in a place like West Blue. From the initial indifference to Ross, who was a small-time pirate hunter and then he became a pirate. The current state of the office is entirely different. Now the mere mention of the name of Ghost Hand pirates left the entire office in chaos. Doberman soon arrived at his office as he was personally responsible for all matters concerning Ghost Hand Ross since Onigumo's defeat in the West Blue. Barrows Town. It seems that he is finally going to step into the Grand Line. Listening to the nervous voice coming from Den Den Mushi, Doberman murmured a little and said, Captain Yukimura, for the time being, don't act against them, don't fight with the Ghost Hand pirates. Yes. Yukimura heard Doberman's order and was surprised, but he still answered immediately. Almost any pirate who appears in Barrows Town will be encircled, suppressed and pursued by Marines under his leadership. At least 3 or 4 out of 10 pirates will be defeated by him in Barrows Town, but this is the first time that he will not move against pirates. He also knows that with the arrangement of Marines in the Barrows Town, he can deal with pirates with the bounty of 35 million, but he is not strong enough to deal with the Ghost Hand pirates. Now that you want to come to Grand Line, come in. I'll wait for you on the Grand Line. Grand Line is not like West Blue, you won't be able to act recklessly here. Doberman glared at the Den Den Mushi. He is not afraid of Ross coming to Grand Line, but he is afraid that Ross will not come. If Ross stays in the West Blue, it will be really hard to get rid of him. Any branch base of the West Blue does not have enough strength to suppress Ghost Hand pirates, and it's not easy to move people from headquarters or the Grand Line to West Blue. It's very troublesome to deal with. But it will be different if he comes to the Grand Line. Once he enters the Grand Line, he will officially enter the region that Marines guarded heavily. The military deployment on the Grand Line is far from what West Blue can match. The highest chief of each branch base is a vice admiral, with more experience and strength than Onigumo. And there are a large number of pirates on the Grand Line whose names are better known than Ghost Hand pirates. Maybe Marines won't even need to deal with Ross, as he may perish on the sea by some pirate hands. Notify the Marine branches nearest to the Reverse Mountains and give me a close look at all the pirates entering the Grand Line. Once I find the Ghost Hand pirates, I will attack them immediately. They must be eradicated. Doberman does not intend to give Ross any more opportunities to grow. Yes. Many Marine Rear Admiral responded by dialing the Den Den Mushi to various branch bases to deliver Doberman's orders, and their serious look gradually turned to a relaxed one. Once Ross enters the Grand Line, he will no longer be under their jurisdiction. Secondly, the strong and tyrannical forces placed on the Grand Line had the abilities to deal with any pirate under the bounty of 120 million berries. They can't deal with the Ghost Hand pirates in the West Blue, but on the Grand Line, he is nothing to the Marines. Barrow's Town. Ross naturally didn't know about the actions of the Marine headquarters, and even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Marines are waiting for him, but they don't know that he is also waiting for them, waiting to meet them on the Grand Line. There are many pirates on the Grand Line with the bounty of 100 million, 200 million, or even 300 million berries, and even the 7 warlords of the sea can be found there. For Ross, it's like a hunter walking into a hunting ground, looking at all those preys from afar and grinning. Those beings will be the cornerstones of his climb to the top of the world. From the moment he enters the Grand Line, he will be closer to killing those who regarded him as a trivial man and ordered his annihilation.